13th to order. I'll look, let's talk about the minutes for any changes to the minutes from 9/15/22.
So there's one clarification change. We had at one point approved the minutes of 8/9, and then you had asked John if we should approve, and he said no hold, so I just need to make that update. This set of minutes. So we can
Yes,
then-
okay. Well,
It wasn't clear, so we went to vote, and then you asked John, but I don't think we actually approved them.
I think we tabled them.
Yeah.
basically.
That's correct.
So let's go ahead and approve those
Yeah,
minutes.
so they're,
unless there's-
yeah, so they're
okay,
here too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So unless there's any other changes or comments that those approved. Okay. And so we're going to reverse order 8/9. Now we'll look at the 9/15 minutes.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions? Changes on those, hearing none. Go ahead and approve those, okay? Moving to item number 3, public comment. Just state your name, street, town, and I don't think I mentioned this last month, but we like to keep them to 2 minutes if we can. So, yes, we recognize this.
Hkms, 21 Glory. Good evening. One year ago, I brought information about Debbie Keith Weevil, Vice President of Practical Learning, basically sells South, and that she should step down. This is the October meeting, 2021. Due to her pushing the salary agenda. Again, at the DEI task force, whatever committee meeting, I also brought this up again. Apparently, she continues on. Parents to know that this is going on. Parents deserve to know. I want to inform parents that there's a website called Courage is a Habit to provide information and tools to protect the parental rights from the school systems. I brought 2 books. One's called Transing Our Children, Partners for Ethical Care of Children and Parents in a Transgender World. Handbook. So if anybody wants to contact me, I'll be putting it out on websites. FAIR is having a roundtable discussion October 24th in Ferguson Library. Panelists with diverse viewpoints on academic proficiency and standards. It's an in-person and an online event. There's another event, I don't have the date, with Ian Rowe, author of Agency, that I highly recommend. On the protection of children, there's an event on November 1st in Westport. Children's Health Defense is organizing it. Panelists include Dr. Mary Holland of Children's Health Defense, Kevin Jenkins of Urban Global Health Alliance, Elena Fishbein of No Left Turn in Education, and Bob Hammer, retired FBI agent of the infiltration of NAMBLA. Parents and residents know that children are being diversely sexualized in elementary schools in Connecticut. Sorry, I'm really passionate about this. Only for 12 years that I've been on the board that means, and I've never thought in my wildest nightmares that what's going on in schools today is going on. Filed a moratorium to stop the forward motion sex curriculum, aka healthy habits, or whatever the hell it's called. In 2016, with Stephanie Pearson Uball and the board of ed at that time. And unfortunately, it didn't pass. I believe that, that certain people on our administrators and push their expert opinions. And the curriculum people, the curriculum committee members don't really realize what they're doing.
Okay,
I pray constantly for the parents to keep God close to their children.
It's all
In Jesus' name. Amen.
any other public comment?
Yeah, okay.
please.
Just from here, or,
Sure, that's fine. Yep, just your name, street, town.
right, it's Debbie Bearer, 8 Hayes Street in Easton. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm very concerned about the fringe groups in town who do not prioritize Easton students. Their goal is to push a national agenda that's focused on disruption, distraction, and conflict. They fight against the subjects they fear most, like honest history, diversity, inclusion, tolerance, and free thought. They also disapprove of and seek to downplay the critical need for students' social, emotional, and mental health. Now these people have made an outrageous request for 5 years of documents via the Freedom of Information Act, a move that's part of the far-right playbook. They are looking for a hidden social studies curriculum that pushes critical race theory. Can they even define critical race theory? This is a witch hunt. Our superintendent is our town's highest paid employee, deserving of every penny. And now he has to turn his attention away from education to deal with this. Waste of time and taxpayers' money. For what? Are these extremists trying to spew so much misinformation and hyperbole that folks are discouraged from participating in town politics? That's not happening. No, we are not letting them control the narrative. We are not letting their insidious tactics affect services that our students need. We are keeping education local. I've wasted enough breath about what these people do, but we must be aware of and speak out against them. What's really at stake here is our students' education. This is why I strongly urge the board to vote against the unnecessary, time-intensive, and costly review of our middle school social studies curriculum. Do not let extremist forces interfere with learning. We are already losing teachers and losing our teachers now and losing the opportunity to have top teachers join our staff. I also have a list of links to media coverage of these kinds of disruptive tactics from all over the country, which I'd like to share and put into the record if possible. Happy to print them out and distribute them. Thank you again for the opportunity to share my views.
Any other public comment? Please.
Hi, my name is Abby Bonoff. I live at 19 Gregory Farm Road in Easton, Connecticut. I'm a freshman at Joe Garland High School, and while I enjoyed not having a lot of homework during my time at Helen Keller and how easy my classes were, I did not feel prepared for the amount of work I would be getting on my first day in high school. It's been a real shock with all the work, tests, and quizzes I've been given. I'd always heard through the years that high school would be a huge jump, but I hadn't realized it would be this big. Please help future freshmen by preparing them better. They might hate you in middle school, but once they get to high school, they will be thanking you for it. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Allison Bonoff, 19 Gregory Farm Road. I want to touch on a few things. One is, kind of what Abby talked about, what I hear mostly at Board of Ed meetings and emails and all that kind of stuff is, and you touched on it, the mental wellness of our children. But yet, we leave them off at 8th grade and good luck to you. You're going to find your way, you're going to do it. There's really no reason to push them to high school and have all this work right away. It's a marathon. It should not be a sprint. And we should really be preparing them more. Stress to the family, stress to the kids. They want to get out there and do extracurricular activities, all this stuff. And we all, went through it. You all say you found your way. But if you really care about mental wellness, then you would do more to step it up each year with the work. I'd also like to talk about a few other things. I'll go quick since someone's counting correctly. Public comment. I really think it's important if you do this once in the beginning, once at the end. After you have these kind of presentations, people want to make comments. They don't want to come back they could come back the next time, but it's not as meaningful. So also you have people that they work in the city, they can't get here. They have single parents, etc., that can't be here physically. We have Zoom, we talk about technology, we should be using it. If we want the public to comment, if we want the public to be engaged, then we have to give them these outlets to do it. The other thing I want to talk about, high school open house, 3 teachers, not 1, not 2, but 3 teachers talked about the curriculum in Easton and Reading, how separate they are, how different they are, how long it takes a whole semester just to gauge where all the kids are. It's like somebody coming from California and Illinois, there is no difference than when they come from Reading and Easton. We have to do something to bridge the curriculum between the 2 districts. The teachers say it. It puts the stress on the teachers. It puts stress on kids that are up here, kids that are down there. I mean, we need to work together. We should take the best from both districts and work the curriculum so that they are, more aligned. The other thing I want to talk about, I think it's in this presentation here, is the climate survey. Parents had 5 days to complete it. Administration had 5 months short of 7 days to this day to get the results out. There's something wrong with that. 5 months to get results out on climate survey that everybody says is very important. But yet we have nothing, it's October, to move forward with. So I hope that these improvement plan is big. That's the other thing. The district is good at preparing fancy PowerPoint presentations. They're great at it. And there's good stuff in there too. But we can't be afraid of big change. We need big change in this district and we need it this year. We all get together. You guys are all getting together hours and hours and hours, and we don't make any forward motion. Somebody at the board of ed, I think they ran on, they want more technology in the schools. Where is it? Where is robotics? Where is coding? These are the things that we talk about. That's going to be in here, but we don't execute on it. We can't prove that we've done any of this. So I don't know, I have some other things, but I really, here's my other thing real quick. I always talk about a CEO that's in their office. They're not walking the hallways of the building. They're not out there knowing what's going on. There is a definite gap between what we think the people up here think's going on and what's going on. We did secret shopper. That's what we do in some of the companies that I've worked for. I recommend that anybody here pick up the phone randomly and call 3 to 5 parents. Call them up. Ask them what we're doing right. Ask them what we're doing wrong. And how can we get it right? Listen to them. Talk to them. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody? Yes.
Carolyn Oppenheim, Hunting Ridge Road. First of all, I want to say that I know that being on any local government board is time consuming and difficult, and in this board in particular, very difficult. There are many voices to be heard, many things to hear, and so I start by thanking you all. However, last month I was one of only a few people here in attendance at the Board of Ed meeting, and only 2 that stayed long enough to hear some what I thought were extremely disturbing thoughts about among this board about altering curriculum. I was really shocked about the turnaround from some of the senior members on this board. That because I've spent many years, night after night, year after year, listening to you let us know that your job is not in the classroom. Your job is to meet the needs of our children. We don't decide what books they're going to read. You don't decide what the teachers teach. You decide how to help get our kids to where we need to be, speaking to your point. So I don't know when that changed or what made you think that, what's that we need to be involved in curriculum, but it was a scary moment when I watched several of you say, the teachers who spent, like, not one teacher, not 1 or 2 teachers, but an entire department across 2 schools and 3 grades decide on how to integrate genocide and Holocaust, very important topics, things that kids need to know about, into our curriculum. And it didn't in a way, they showed us suggestions about how that would be, not suggestions, they showed us how that could be done. Let's talk about a forward expansion and how genocide happened during westward expansion in the Americas. And it did. It's important that children know that, because we were taught that, hurrah, yay, we went west and we won and we're great. But that's not how it all happened. And it's important for them to know it all the history. And they're old enough to know at 6th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, that, you know what, history isn't all pretty. It's not all roses. Things happen. And so to hear some of you say that we should be, they're not, maybe it's a little difficult for them. You know, kids, it might be hard for them, and they've gone through a tough time. They have gone through a tough time. But let's not make it tougher on them by not telling them what happened. These things happened. So to hear you guys say that is a little difficult. We have had a curriculum instructor who's far more qualified than I am, will ever be, to tell us about curriculum. But she's also more qualified than most of you. So let's listen to what she has to say. We hire these people because we trust in them. They hire teachers because they trust in the teachers. And it's not one teacher, it's not two teachers, it was the entire department. So to hear you, I was floored to hear that sort of coming from people that have said to people in this community, this is not what we do. We make sure the kids get what they need. That's what we do. So thank you very much.
Any other public comment? Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry I was late. My name's Amy Wolfkiel. I live at 575 Sportable Road. And I didn't make the last meeting, but what you said and what you said kind of really confirms a bit of what I came to say, and I'll be real quick. But I was kind of triggered to come because I don't come to every meeting, but two things I saw in direct succession. The first was the addition of the curriculum discussion on the agenda, because it did live in my memory when you said that we're not going to get involved in that. We're going to leave it to the experts and teachers and administrators. So that pops on, and I hear right away about that gigantic FOIA at the central office, the 5 years curriculum. And all of a sudden, it seemed like there were dots that needed to be connected. One of the things that I've done for the last couple of years is I studied the assault and kind of infiltration of right-wing groups on school boards across America. And as I've read them, I've had this kind of detachment that almost made me feel guilty, because it could be where the right-wing agenda does target the schools in the school board. The effects are so disastrous, and yet I thought, oh, thank goodness, there may be some tendency in Easton, but we've been so fortunate not to have to deal with that. And then I saw these two things come in direct succession, and it seemed like a warning light to me. I don't know if it is or not. It just seemed like that to me. And the only thing I can really add to the conversation is two things. The first thing is that if this is a moment when, is this a moment when we're really reversing policy? Like, like Carolyn said, floored, are we going to start bringing this stuff up curriculum level to the school board discussion? That seems like a reversal to me. And if it is this kind of a turning point when we're going to accommodate more of the right-wing political agenda in the schools? And if it is, then I think we want to understand it as that. And secondly, we're in a position to have a reasonable expectation for what happens then. When we let that happen, when we open the schools to a culture war, at least it's not 2018, so the results are not going to be surprising. The school board loses control of it immediately, regardless of your political affiliation, because there's no control in that agenda. That's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is that the community just bitterly is divided. The third thing is most parents are moderates, so they're furious. The fourth thing is that school board meetings are very, very difficult to get anything done in, because they're very contentious, and none of the things that really need to get done ever get approached, which kind of talks to your point. Next, teachers and administrators flee as quickly as they can. The best ones go first, and obviously they're hard to replace. The next thing is the press starts to cover the mess, and the reputation of your school and your town tanks. And guess what follows? Your property values. And lastly, there's kids. And the kids are the last people who are ever part of the equation once the culture war trigger is pulled. We never deal with the things we have to deal with: the learning loss, the COVID, the math, the mental health, I'm sure everybody's already talked about it, because we know what these problems are, and with it, you know, with seriousness of purpose, we want to attack them, and I think all of these things can be reasonably expected if this really surprising reversal of now putting curriculum on the agenda is a turning point. And maybe I'm overreacting, but I guess I wouldn't be the only one if I were. And I guess I just wanted to say that I think that you have an opportunity to make a choice. You either let the floodgates open, full on culture war. We're gonna let these folks have input into our curriculum, and guess what happens next? Which books are in the library? And what are we gonna ban? There are literally thousands of credible sources that you can access to tell you exactly how the situation went unfold if you open the floodgates, or you could stand in support of the community and the kids. Because the only thing we do know is that nobody ever wins in these culture wars. But the kids in the community, especially the kids in the schools, always lose. So I'm just hoping this isn't that turning point moment, but it did strike me as that when I saw the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Let's go to board member comment.
I'll just start by saying I certainly hope that we keep politics out of this Board of Ed, and Randy, as our leader, I hope you help protect our board. Thank you.
Thank you. Alicia,
Well said. No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Evan?
I just wanted to draw attention that there are two big fundraisers going on at Samuel Staples and Helen Keller Middle School. There's a fun run, I think there are fun runs at both places and fun run at both, that are raising significant funds to really support equipment and other, is it a fun run?
We're at Bash
Yeah.
celebrations.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
That's much cooler than a fun
Like an
run.
extravaganza, and it's tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow, great, good timing.
We started before. so
Yeah,
it's-
But like the
we are-
money goes, I think, again, to things that are often unfunded by the board. And so just wanted to encourage families, if you haven't signed up for mybooster.com and raised some cash for our kids, this is an opportunity to do that. I'll also echo what Jen and Alicia have said is, you know, this is a place where we create governance and a budget for our schools to operate. We have unbelievable experts. You know, Dr. McKinnon, who's been here for a year, it feels like you've been here longer because of the amazing work you've done. Dr. Pearson-Ugal, Sarah Scrofani, our other central office personnel, and of course, our amazing administrators in the back of the room. And they are there to operate our schools. And, you know, we trust them to make really great decisions for our kids, for our community. And I hope we don't let anything get in the way of their decision-making opportunities.
Jen?
Nothing from me.
No, okay.
Nothing from me.
Good, excellent. Let's get to the big show.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you to the public who made it out here this evening. We have administrative reports. However, we would like to keep those reports very small because we'd like to spend our time on the item number 1 and 2, sorry, excuse me, item A and B on the agenda. So unless the administrators have something they would like to add, I know you've got some data in the reports from the schools. Anything else from Kim and Steve about administrative reports?
No, I'm feeling quite good. Thanks.
Okay,
I just want to thank the board for their generosity in giving us this new flooring, so I think it came out great. The furniture started to come back in as well, and so some of my appreciation. Yeah, this is the first event with Adamant, so just fine, on Friday, so we're still reshelving everything.
We're taking our shoes off.
Yeah. Don't spill.
looks great. Dr. Pearson, you go.
Briefly, I want to bring to the board's attention some reading legislation that's quite new. And I'm hesitant to provide you a full written report about it because our sense at the central office level across Connecticut is that there will likely be a bit of a pullback on this. This is unusual in that this reading legislation is quite specific at the state level regarding K-3 program expectations. It mandates all public school districts in the state of Connecticut to select from 5 approved programs that have come down from the state. The timeline of implementation is unusually fast. It would need to be implemented next year. which would require us to do a full review and vetting of these programs in the next month in order to meet the state's first deadline for confirming information before we bring the budget to all of you for your consideration. So as you can see, this is challenging on a number of levels. So it is our sense that there will be some adjustment to this, but I certainly want you to be aware that it's out there. If indeed it moves forward, you should expect to see a very significant portion of our budget proposal will be dedicated to a comprehensive reading program at the K-3 level, akin to the type of reading programs that we saw many decades ago.
Is this a science of reading, you think?
This is the science of reading mandate, but this is the sort of companion to it, which is the actual reading programs.
Got it.
I think in the next month, we will have a greater sense of where this is at the state level. The Superintendent's Association has been working closely to get the state some clear, specific feedback. And so I provided further updates.
Would it be your recommendation for those who would like to contact their sort of elected leaders to reach out and urge perhaps a longer timeline?
That's a wonderful idea. If you feel so inclined, you might want to voice your views regarding, in particular, the timeline of this mandate, which makes it quite difficult for us as educators to go through the appropriate vetting process with these companies, not to mention the challenge of these companies to arrange presentations for every single public school district in the state of Connecticut and then respond to the demand in a timely way. So the timeline is one of the concerns regarding this legislation. The legislation is also somewhat controversial in terms of, again, the specificity of them directing us to use particular programs, which has always honestly had much more local control. When there was first talk about this, my hunch in my many years of experience in Connecticut was that this was something that might come in the form of suggestions or recommendations, and probably only the priority or the alliance districts would have the accountability tied to it. Because that sometimes happens in the districts that require the greatest amount from the support from the state often mandates more of the work so that they can control the funding and the progress in those districts. It is unusual for 0 to 8 districts to be required to implement very specific curriculum from a given publisher. And that's the level of specificity. They've given us the publisher and the name of the book.
What was the name of the program again? I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Could you just repeat what the name of the program was that their legislation?
So it's not a program, so I can say that it's Connecticut General Statute 10-4II requires the Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success to review and approve at least 5 reading curricula to be effective for the 2023-2024 school year. Pursuant to that general statute, they added the following K-3 curriculum programs listed in alphabetical order are approved for use as they meet the guidelines as established by this reading implementation council. And we were given, I stand corrected, 6 programs to choose from.
Thank you.
But the approach is called science of reading.
The science of reading is the
Science of
general
reading.
approach that I have referred to in past
Yeah.
meetings. So we're not in opposition for the important need to focus on reading skills, phonics, and phonological awareness. The far reach isn't telling us which publishers.
Are these 6 different iterations, are they offered by 6 different companies?
They are.
So the state thinks that,
There's
100
2 from the same company.
okay. So the state thinks that 169 school districts are going to be able to meet with, in this case, 4 different vendors to hear their presentation. And all this is going to happen within a 30 to 60 day period. Okay.
Indeed. So this will be going to the category to be continued.
Any other questions? All right, it's always great to hear from Sarah Scrofani about our budget and
So since we just talked about, well, we just talked about timelines, we've already started to organize the budgeting process, believe it or not, for next year. And you can expect the same type of information available online throughout the whole process. So we'll be rolling that out once again. And then in your packet, you have the budget object summary that you're probably familiar with. Right now, we're just moving steadily ahead with there's not really any significant concerns regarding the budget. I would say that given the supply chain issues, we are closing out last year's budget. So as an example, the flooring and the carpet was just installed. I anticipate mid to the end of next month for all of those things to actually ship and arrive so that we have them all, and close that out. And so we are at the September 30th marks the end of the first quarter of the fiscal year. And we have expended and obligated about 48% of the approved budget. And our primary encumbrances are healthcare, central office, because we encumber all of that right up front, and then salaries. Next month, instead of this month, I will be looking to transfer some salary lines to just that object summary. But I don't want to take away anything from the time of that for our student achievement presentation.
Sarah, just
And then there's of course the healthcare analysis. So you have a healthcare analysis claims report that is as of August 30th. I mentioned last month that we needed to make some corrections. There's actually, you'll notice that if you look back at last year's minutes, you will notice that there are some corrections to last year's column as well as July and August of this year. So you will notice that those numbers are slightly different because they just needed to be updated. So now they are correct.
Sarah, at the last meeting, you mentioned that there was an error
There was.
on this, and it was, you thought it was something to do with Brown and Brown and not Anthem.
That is correct.
That resolved?
That is resolved, and what you have in front of you is correct.
The real deal.
The real deal. I would hate to see Easton charge for another district's claims.
393 is the second largest we've had in probably 6 years. But hope it doesn't continue.
Good catch.
any other questions? from
Just real quick, why would expenditures month to date and year to date be negative figures for pre-K teachers?
Remember how I said we need to adjust those salary
Is that the
lines?
reclass?
It's a
Okay,
reclass. Yeah,
okay.
we had talked about doing it this month, but we will,
Okay,
we'll do it next month.
thank you.
And just, I don't know if you look at some of these, the year-to-date numbers and the unexpended, have you looked at this as a trend and sort of compared, how are we doing versus last year or the year before?
So we actually have some new tools that were purchased but not implemented, that we've actually implemented for this year. And so we are very much on track for where we should be. And I think when we do those reclassifications next month, I think that will really be able to give you an even better view of where we are. And I will point out any significant changes. You'll notice that there will be in the transfer report next month, some small amounts that move from one to the other, and you'll wonder, why are we doing that? And that's that $8,000. I want to make sure that the $8,000 that you designated for the new teachers at Samuel Staples, that those are reflected in the actual budget lines. We put that in kind of at the end and did not say, oh, this is going to music, this is going to kindergarten, this is going to PE. So I want to make sure that that's reflected so that we can track that over time and then budget appropriately for the following year.
And you say where the sort of trend is normal and within the write downs also for healthcare?
it's a little bit, right now, it's a little bit on the high side. We're gonna see what that looks like in the next month or two.
Any other questions for Sarah? Part of the minute conversation from the August 9th meeting, whatever, we talked a little bit about healthcare and just trying to frame the 21-22 spend. Even though we contributed $500,000 at our last meeting, it was a contribution to essentially get us to the year and have a significant reserve, $1 million reserve to end the year. But even after that $500,000 contribution, we underspent our healthcare last year by $840,000 approximately, which is terrific. We have healthy teachers and it inures to the benefit of the town and the budget and all that stuff. Everything about that is fantastic. I always find it when I look at other districts and I'm reading the minutes and I'm trying to parse what the heck they're talking about. I didn't want the public to look at that and go, well, gee whiz, they overspent. They had to contribute $500,000 from someplace else into the healthcare. So if this ever makes it into the minutes in some way, shape, or form, or it doesn't, if that's the reality, is that we actually underspent, and that's a great thing. It's great for the teachers, it's great for the town. So.
I tried to articulate that in the, that you could see that although the funds are encumbered at this time, we actually currently have expended 0% of the planned and approved budget, drawing on those prior year contributions. So we also added that into the healthcare analysis report to try to bring some additional clarity and transparency to that.
Yep, great.
So if you have anything else, you can let Randy know and we can work on that report even more.
Excellent. Moving right along.
Okay, thank you so much.
Chrome is in full screen mode, but
Oh, look at that.
Oh,
it knew. You wanna-
I don't know what that is.
So if you hit escape.
Yes.
Full screen instead of being in slideshow.
Okay, are we doing?
So now you can click slideshow.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, are there any extra copies? There?
You should have.
Any extra copies? I just want to. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So tonight we plan to discuss student achievement along with our district and school goals. Last year we presented our scores following the pandemic, and we weren't surprised at that time that our literacy scores had declined by 5% and our math scores had declined by 10%. And we also stated at that time that wasn't a local phenomenon, that occurred with districts around us. And when we look at the national assessments, it was the biggest decline in over 30 years. So we did see a significant drop in student achievement as a result of the pandemic. But if you think about that, 5% loss in literacy and 10% loss in mathematics, that a 1% is commensurate to about 3 to 4 weeks of lost learning time. So 5% loss in literacy could equate from anywhere from 15 weeks to 5 months. And a decline of 10% in mathematics could be anywhere from 10 weeks to 5 months. So beyond finding a way to increase the lost instructional time, this presentation is really important because we're going to be focusing on student data and meeting students where they are. The presentation will be divided into 3 parts. The first part is primarily focusing on our assessments, our smarter balanced test results, and formative assessments. Part 2, we'll be talking a little bit about our district improvement plan, our high impact instructional strategies and what those focus areas are. And in part 3, you get to hear from your administrators to hear what their school improvement plans are. So first, I do want to set the table, so to speak, and describe the difference between formative assessment and summative assessment. Formative assessment occurs during student learning and is used by the teacher to improve learning while it is taking place. So, and summative assessment occurs after an episode of learning to summarize how a student did at that time. According to research, formative assessment has the greatest impact on student achievement because it places the information in the hands of teachers and students during the learning episode. Whereas summative standardized assessment is more useful to compare how we're doing year over year and how we compare to our colleagues. So if we just wanted to look at the scale of importance, really we should be emphasizing formative assessments more than the standardized assessments because that's more impactful for student learning. So in this section of the presentation, we're going to be talking about our Smarter Balance test results and really looking at our performance from 2016 all the way up to last year, which is 2022. Just to remind you, the Smarter Balance assessment looks at English, language arts, and mathematics in grades 3 to 8. And it also looks at our science standards, which are administered in grades 5, 8, and 11. So what do the tests measure? In English language arts, the focus is on reading, writing, speaking and listening, research and inquiry. Those are called claims, and you can actually dig deeper, and each of those claims has a certain description. So for example, in reading, students are reading close and analytically to comprehend a range of increasingly complex text. In writing, students can produce effective and well-grounded writing for a range of purposes and audiences, and so on. Math, claim 1, concepts and procedures. Students can explain and apply mathematical concepts and interpret and carry out mathematical procedures with precision and fluency. So concepts and procedures, problem solving, communication and reasoning, and modeling and data analysis. And each of those has an in-depth kind of description about what each area covers. This is a really important slide because essentially what we report to you and what we will be reporting to you in a moment is the percent at which students reach level 3 and level 4. That means they reach level goal and above goal. But there are 2 other bands, levels 1 and level 2. That's for students who are below those particular areas. The scores are reported in scale scores, and that's a little bit technical, but essentially we provide that information to you at that level. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So in this chart, you'll see English language arts for Easton, Reading, and the DERG average.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Can you just move that little box?
Yep, I'll move that right over there. There we go.
Thank
Is that better?
Yes, yes, I appreciate it.
Okay. I can see me. Okay. So this graph shows our English language arts reading scores and our DERG average. Easton is in red, Reading is in gray, and the DERG average is represented in blue. And just to remind everyone, the DERG represents districts that are like us, and they include Darien, New Canaan, Ridgefield, Weston, Westport, and Wilton. So I want you to notice a decline between 2018, 2019, and 2020, 2021. That was the decline I was talking to you about as a result of COVID. But then if I draw your attention to the far right set of bars, 2021, 2022, they're the scores that we're talking about right now. So in grades 3 to 8, Easton increased from 76.7% in 2021 to 77.2% in 2022.
So that's 77.2% of the kids were at 3 or 4?
Yes, correct. And Reading remained flat from 2021 to 2022 at 73.9%. The DERG average is 78.9%. So Easton is approximately 1% away from the DERG average, and Reading is approximately 6% away from the DERG average.
Susan, when did the testing change? When did SBACs come in and it replaced?
Many years ago.
It was a long time ago, okay.
6-7 years probably.
Was it in conjunction with 15-16? Is that the first year that we went that?
No, this is just the number of years that we chose to share with you. I could look back, it might have been 2015, 16, I don't recall the exact.
It was 14.
14?
14, okay.
What was the driver in 18, 19? That was 85% and it dropped down significantly the next year.
Yeah, it wasn't COVID, that would be pre-COVID.
How come the-
So in 1920, of course, there was no testing at all. And then you see last year, so there's a missing year there. There was 1 year where we did not administer. a
So if you
study.
go back to reading,
Go back to-
so go back to
I know,
reading from
just-
17, 18 to 18, 19,
Right.
there's a 5-point
That's a
or
5-point
4-point
difference and
drop, 4.5.
I don't think it had anything to do with
Right, no, this is certainly. prior
COVID.
to-
COVID wasn't here yet.
So,
So
have to go back and read the
what
minutes.
was, you have any idea what the drivers were there? Well, you weren't here, I know.
Do you remember what the
I
drivers
forget
were?
that about that. Well, and it feels like there's a little bit of a discussion about statistics and sort of margin of error. Given sort of we have relatively small populations, that's 5 students, per grade. Right? And that, you literally have
Could be.
right, with about 100 kids per grade, these are easy numbers to conceptualize.
Well, why don't we write down that question?
Yeah.
And we can see if we can investigate that particular, those sets of years and get back to you.
The 0.5 point change between last year and this year, or the last 2 buckets of columns, is that in line with what you would have expected, the 0.5 point, or would you have expected something different?
Well, your growth each year depends on your actions and your instructional strategies that you employ. But you can typically expect 1 to 2% growth a year. And you could probably, and it depends on the size of the group, right? If you're looking at grades 3 to 8, then you may expect a smaller percent growth because you're dealing with a bigger band of students. But when you look at a specific grade level, and based on how those students scored the year before and how they did in the cohort, and then you can really delve into that particular group of kids, and you can more accurately predict how they're going to do. So
And
you
this
actually,
is all grades, so this is a large group, right?
these are all that's all students grades 3 to 8.
Yeah.
Right? And so these are, so this is mathematics, and I don't think we got there, right? Correct?
No, we don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So same again, Easton is in red, Reading is in gray, the Derg average is in blue. The gap between 2019 and 2020 is when COVID occurred. And we're looking at right now, 2021 to 2022. Easton increased from 76.7% in 2021 to 77.2%. Reading remained flat. Sorry, that's language arts.
Yeah.
Wrong page here. Where are we? Easton increased from 67% in 2021 to 69% in 2022, which is a 3% growth. Reading increased from 69% in 2021 to 71.5%, which is about a 2.5% growth. And if you look at the Derg average here, Easton is about 5 points away from the Derg average in math. Reading is about 4 points away from the Derg average in math. Okay. So these scores represent grades 3 to 8. Dr. Pearson Hugo is going to talk a little bit about the cohort data, and she'll talk a little bit about science, and then we'll get back. I'll come back up to the podium.
All right, so as I share the cohort data regarding our students, I will be sharing from the district lens. So I'm going to make note of any district level initiatives or curriculum initiatives. You will hear more specific information about how the school leadership teams are addressing student performance and student needs as you hear them describe their school improvement plans. So first you can see information about Reading. So I'm going to move right past that and jump into Easton. So since the Reading slide was up prior, you can see that our third graders in both districts did not perform on par with what they typically show us they understand in grade 3 in reading. What we know this year is that there is a very focused effort to provide time for phonics instruction for students all the way through third grade. So here in Easton, this will be the first year that our third grade teachers are using a program called Foundations. And Foundations will provide the very specific skill instruction that we believe is going to bolster their skill set and enable them to be better comprehenders. Ultimately, good reading is all about comprehension, but if they don't have the decoding skills and the fluency skills to pull together a story, well, then comprehension is not likely to occur. So that is certainly an effort K-3 in both districts. You look at the other grades, our performance either stayed on par or had slight dips. In grades 4 through 8, the upper elementary and the middle school, a change this year in the district level will be providing time for teachers to have discussions with the literacy specialists regarding the integration of vocabulary and grammar into their curriculum. And that sort of more specific integration, we think, will also help to bolster the students' reading skills so that they can perform on par with what we expect.
So basically, when you look at this, what I'm taking away a little bit is from what Dr. McKinnon shared, when you see those drops, where the drops really did happen in 3 grade levels, 3rd grade, 7th and 8th grade in reading. At the other grade levels actually went up. So when you look at the number, the total kids that we were just talking about, like they seem to be focused in a few grade levels.
Yes,
Well, how do
it's not, you
get
don't see a
7th
dip
grade?
in every single grade level.
79,
Yeah.
76, and down.
So if you look at,
So like 3 kids,
You
yeah.
stay with the cohort.
last year with our 4th graders, you can look, they made significant progress from one year to the next, from 78 to 87.
But there's definitely like a 3rd grade, but
73 to 82, 73 to 79, and then a slight dip for 6 and 7,
Right.
and then 7 to 8. Yes.
And is there any tracking of as you're looking at various initiatives? I know there were cases where teachers looped with students and sort of other sort of all hands on deck stuff that we were doing, last year and the year before. Are you able to track that at the sort of classroom level and see if there's impact?
We could, and that's something that you'll hear more about from the building leaders.
Great.
Moving on to math, you can see our reading, our reading.
Can I just,
Yes.
what John just said was interesting. Can you say it again? What was your topic? You were,
Looping.
I'm sorry, I forgot what I
you were
said.
talking about looping.
So, was there anything
Well, it was sort
specific?
of all
that we
those
could-
efforts that we were doing to just try to do everything we could to support the children, are we able to sort of measure the impact of that, the efficacy of that?
Okay, well, that's 2 different questions. One is a bigger question, but one is a narrow question. You asked about, was there an impact of looping? Okay, and that's a very specific strategy. Students stay with one teacher for 2 years, looping, right? Later, we're going to talk about high impact instructional strategies. And we're going to talk about that there are some effective strategies that have more impact on student learning more than others. So what you just talked about in terms of looping, we can actually give you an effect size on that. So stay tuned. That's an interesting question. We'll talk not specifically about looping, but the idea of what things are impactful.
the other thing that I just want to point is for grade 3 in both reading, I think, in math is,
This is not our chart.
I know it's not our chart, but like,
Okay.
we had many more kids in intervention. Like, remember when we looked at intervention numbers last year in the lower grades and we were than typical, like in a typical year. So it
Yes.
just would lead to that, these results.
You
not being
did,
as surprising.
and there's a cohort story to tell here, but the
Yeah.
story is really a building level story to
Yeah.
tell. So I'm sharing with you sort of district level initiatives. So looping, for board members who are not aware of what that is, looping is when a teacher keeps the same group of students together for more than 1 year.
Do we do that?
Sometimes that occurs. It's not something that is, as I said, a district initiative where we've said in this grade or with this teacher, it will always occur, but it certainly has happened in the past. A benefit of looping would be that they build strong relationships. Some people would believe that there's less lost time at the start of the school year, in part really because that relationship is already a foundation for their work. So the relationship between teacher and student, and also with the families as well. So there's that sense of trust, and the students can begin the year sort of hit the ground running. That's the idea behind it.
in these years coming off of, a health crisis, I can imagine that some would be particularly interested in that. So you can see Reading cohort data for math and our Easton data. So you can see again, our third grade students struggled here. I think these students really have seen the effect of the pandemic and lost learning time, as Dr. McKinnon was sharing earlier.
Fourth grade too.
Differently, our fourth graders went from a 79 to an 87. So made really nice progress from 21 to 22. And you can see some either stability or growth in the other years, and obviously very concerning performance for our eighth graders, well below what we would typically see. At the middle school level in math, you might remember that in the year that we conducted a textbook review at the elementary level, we held off on doing that same review at the middle school level for a number of reasons. One was related to the amount of the budget request that would be coming your way if we were to propose two different programs for elementary and middle at the same time. And the second was because some of these programs were really emerging. There were some newer programs that were being piloted in districts, and we wanted to learn a little bit more about the success of other districts before jumping in to do a full review and make a purchase. This year, I will be working closely with our math specialists at the two middle schools in Easton and Reading to look closely at our current collection of materials and their alignment with the standards. So our students might be doing a lot of wonderful things in math, but if it's not well aligned to the standards, then their performance is going to show on the Smarter Balanced Assessment, right? So it might be that if we were measuring other areas that are emphasized by some of the resources that we're using, we would see stronger performance in other areas. I don't know that that's our story, but it's something that I'm going to be looking into this year and seriously considering doing a math textbook review at the middle school level.
Stephanie, does
Yes.
the test, I thought in years past, we talked about the test will show us areas,
Yes.
right? And so we have a roadmap already that basically says, okay, in these areas, we need some work.
It does. It does indeed. It's different than the legacy assessment, the CMT. The CMT would be broken down into strands, and we could really be so specific about geometry and measurement and problem solving. And some of us might remember some of those presentations to the board. But we certainly have claims and targets with the Smarter Balanced Assessment. So it is possible for our teams to really dig into the individual student performance and look at where they excelled and where they fell down. And then piece that together with a more complete profile of the student and look at the formative assessment information as well to say, does this come together to form one picture, or are we seeing different performance on one assessment than what we're seeing on our formative assessments? That is so important, right? So you have to imagine that for our students, particularly those who might feel anxious in test-taking situations, when they're taking a high-stakes test, such as the state assessment, even though it's adapted and they do have more time, there are some students who don't perform as well on state measures as they might on a classroom assessment that just feels a little bit more comfortable. So we look at all of those things.
I know we implemented a new math curriculum last year in Vision Math.
We do.
So typically, it's pretty typical for when you implement a new thing, there to be a small implementation dip.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that could explain?
We don't see it in every grade, so I
Right, yeah,
can't
that's
say
why
that we
it's
really
interesting.
see it. What I heard from our specialists, and they in turn were hearing from the teachers, was that it was not possible for the teachers to get through every single unit. And that's very typical in the first year of implementing a new program, because the teachers are trying to really stay true to the teacher's manual. So they are teaching every single component as it's written in the guide. And then after the lesson, they say, next year I'm going to do that one differently. Next year I'm going to toss that out altogether. I've already shared with you that we have significantly shortened our assessments because we felt that our elementary math assessments were too long last year. So we've made a lot of changes, and the hope is certainly that this year they will be able to pace through the entire math curriculum, and that in turn should show in their performance. Certainly, if they can't get to the units, then they're obviously not going to do well on the assessment.
Question.
I'm not familiar, I don't have a middle schooler yet, so I don't know, but what kind of resources, if a student is struggling and they need extra help, do they have resources available, or do parents kind of have to rely on hiring their own tutors?
Oh, no, we have comparable resources here at our middle school as we do at the elementary school. So all schools are part of what we call SRBI, or scientific research-based intervention. We call it SIT here. And that includes a review of all student performance data and different benchmark targets. So if a student is falling down, then a data team would come together, a SIT team would come together and talk about the student's performance and consider whether they need some additional support. And that would be at the tier 2 level initially. There'd be a little bit of pull-out instruction a few times a week. Okay. The student is not responding to that treatment or intervention, then the team will come back together and say, we're not seeing a response here. Do we need to change the frequency? Do we need to change the treatment? Do we need to change our approach? And then that would move to tier 3. So there's much greater frequency, intensity. And then again, looking at, is the student now responding? And if the student still isn't responding after many weeks pass by, then it's a question of, is there something else that's interfering with the student's learning, such as a disability? So it's a multi-tiered approach, and it exists in our elementary school as well as our middle school. Thank you.
Just a comment. The presentation is 60 slides long. We are at slide 15, and I'm just some of the questions you're asking, which are great questions, we're probably going to answer later in your presentation. So, I don't know what the best strategy is, honestly. No, whether you want to write down a question, ask at the end, or whether you want to keep going when the moment strikes.
Or just say, hey, we're gonna answer it later, and then
Yeah.
we can just maybe pause.
Yeah, we won't be offended.
Yeah,
Okay.
Great questions. I just like
Yeah.
to take.
Yeah.
No, let's keep moving. No, we're
You chef tennis balls. that you
Jason will just
throw
give
at
me
us.
the.
Yeah.
All right.
right.
All right, so I'll be really brief with science. Science is broken into 3 major areas. The content is represented by the disciplinary core ideas. We also have science and engineering practices. Those are, they might include questions, models, analyzing data, and then finally cross-cutting concepts. And the cross-cutting concepts are things such as cause and effect, patterns, proportion, and things of that nature. Our science program at the middle level is an integrated approach. And what that means is that we do not provide a year as a silo of science instruction. So we had a choice when the NGSS was adopted by the state of Connecticut to provide a domain approach. So in 6th grade, they would have life science. In 7th grade, they would have physical science. In 8th grade, they would have earth and space, or use an integrated approach. We worked with a K-12 team really over a couple of years and ultimately landed on an integrated approach. We felt that was more authentic. Science in the real world does not always exist in a single domain. And it also gives the benefit to our students that their experience in any one year, if the expectation is they're going to master the content in an entire science domain in 1 year, and in that year, the match between teacher and student, or what's happening for that student for whatever reason might not be optimal, then their understanding of an entire domain would be affected in some way, for better or for worse. By having an integrated approach, it's more of a continuum of learning across the 3 grades. So that's the approach that we follow. In terms of thinking about district initiatives, you will see in terms of our performance that our grade 5 students did quite well. Our grade 8 students did not do quite well. And we are taking a hard look at this. So you heard a comment earlier in our public comments about practices in the 2 districts. This is something we are looking at very closely. In Easton, we don't have a science coach or coordinator. In Reading, the district benefits from having what we call a STIP. That's the Science, Technology, Instructional Approach. And that person also really functions as a coordinator, working closely to be sure that the units are calibrated with the most current information from the state, and that that's actually what's being taught in the classroom. So while we have terrific building leaders, without having that sort of content leader in this area, drift, I'll say, is more likely to happen, but we are taking a good look. I know that our 8th graders are now at Barlow, but we're really taking a hard look at that curriculum to be sure that what is actually being taught is still aligned with the written curriculum and in turn aligned with the standards. We are also going to be implementing more of the formative assessments that are released from the state, because as Dr. McKinnon shared earlier, the formative assessments are a great opportunity for us. The formative assessments inform. So as we dipstick the students' understanding, we can gather information about their strengths and their needs, and then the teachers then tailor the instruction accordingly. We need to do more of that. And so we're looking at some resources from the state, as well as some resources through a company, and it's software company. So that is the story.
Just a point of clarification.
Yes.
So as we look at the 8th grader here, these are now 9th graders?
Yes,
As we looked at, in the same thing as we were looking at the cohorts going down across, we're looking at 8th graders, those are 9th graders.
absolutely. Yes,
Okay, so struggling here in science, also struggling in math.
yes,
Those are the students who got sent home in March as 6th graders.
yes. Yes, they did. So as you can see, it's, it's not a real stretch to see that their middle school experience would be affected.
Yeah, they basically did middle school, not middle school.
Yeah. And we heard the loss of instructional time and the impact that it has on students.
I agree, but the same token, Reading is flat.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Although their middle school isn't the same as our middle school because they started 5th grade.
Yeah.
So there's maybe a difference there in sort of familiar with the building, or, it'll be interesting to look at the effect size of various components and variables as we do science on numbers.
Yeah, it is challenging to tell one story about the performance, because sometimes there are many stories that help us to understand how our students are excelling and where they're showing need. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to my partner.
Go. Everyone still with us? Okay, great. All right. Just move, make sure I've got it right. All right. This slide demonstrates our English language arts scores for all students, high need students, and non-high need students. If you look across the x-axis, that is students' performance. And so we want the bubbles to be as far right as possible. You can see the line there, 60, 70, 80. And then if you look up the y-axis, you can see growth, okay? So we do need to think about where students are in terms of the performance and what their growth rate is, which is really important. But the point of this slide is to look at the blue circle. The blue circle is all of our students and how they're doing. They're around about the 80% in terms of in performance, but they're below expected growth, okay? The green circle are our non-high needs students. They're doing better, right? And the orange dot there are just our high needs kids. So these students are our students with special education needs and our English language learners. So the goal here is to close the gap. If we're talking about closing the gap with just 5 students and that affects our performance, then if we looked at our high needs students and concentrated on moving them to the right towards the 80% line in performance and up in terms of growth, then we're going to increase where that blue dot is, okay? So it's really important to think about resources that we allocate to different groups of students. In the area of language arts, you can see that the blue dot there, all students, is below the growth line and around 80. And then you can see the next slide. And let me just make sure this is the right group of people. I can't see that. Okay, so this is math. Right, so you can see English language arts, okay, and then comparing math. So math, our growth is higher, but our performance is slightly lower. And the blue and the green circle, all students and non-high need students, pretty close together. But again, look at where our high need students are in the orange there as well. So we really do need to know who these students are that are in the orange bubble and to provide support to these students, because that will dramatically increase and close the gap. All right, so Randy asked a really good question about, you're providing us with the percent of students at levels 3 and 4. There's other data that we delve into on the back end. So we actually open up the hood and look kind of at these other performance assessments. So if you look in the top right-hand corner, I know this slide is quite busy, but you see summative math and summative ELA, and it shows the percent in the green and the percent in the blue. We've got 29% at goal and 43% above goal, 9% at level 1, 19% at level 2. Our task is to increase all students, but to take a look back to the previous slide, our high needs students, the students at level 1 and level 2, and to get them into the green. The same thing for English language arts. So that's when you look at the performance level. If you look at the bottom section of the slide, you actually see the performance distribution according to targets. So you see there for grade 6 reading, there's a target 1, target 10, target 11, target 12. And target 12 looks at analyzing how information is presented within or across text, or determining how information within or across text reveals an author's purpose when reading. So essentially, that is a very specific skill that we want our students to do well at. And if we look at that, we can see in the performance levels that 10% of our students in that particular target are below standard, 59% are approaching the standard, and 31% are above standard. So in sum, I know this is a complex slide, we need to look at the percent of students who aren't at goal. We need to analyze down to the claim and target level and actually turnkey that instruction and focus on these instructional skills in our classroom, because we only have 31% above standard in that particular area, right? So once you know what those specific areas are, then we're going to target those specific areas.
Jason, am I looking at this right? 72 sixth graders took this out of 95?
Yes, 42, 22, and 8.
That seems low, but maybe that's typical.
Yeah.
Okay. Just, I'm sure it matters. I was just curious.
That's interesting. Well, the theme is still the same, right? We still need to look at the target level and the performance across at specific targets. And I'm going to delve into my screenshot of that slide there and look at the number. Okay. And so kind of in conclusion, concerning our Smarter Balanced test results, the major topics that we need to focus on here, or the key points, is that we need to target classroom instruction and support students according to the performance levels that I showed you before. We need to determine student growth and project when students are going to reach a certain level. And we need to deliver instruction and develop skills at the claim and target level. So in the top right-hand corner of that slide, we can actually calculate where students are according to their scale score, apply their growth rate, and predict the point at which they're going to achieve level 3 and level 4. And so that's really important. And so if we know that there are certain students at level 1 and 2, we need to analyze their growth, focus on the skills they need, and find out when they're going to reach a certain level. Okay, and so this is just another tool that we're discussing as a district level strategy that we can use at the school to kind of use that data more effectively. All right, so congratulations, you made it through part 1 of the presentation. And now we're into part 2, which is our district and school goals. And quite simply here, that our district and school goals should be focused on student achievement. And we need to determine what metrics matter and measure student achievement and develop goals around those metrics. We've all seen school improvement plans and district improvement plans, and they're cumbersome plans, I said this during the last meeting, are the equivalent of a chicken running around with its head cut off, right? Our staff are not focused on the right things at the right time, right? So it was really important to us that we're not giving you a binder with our school improvement plan, that our district and school improvement plan is actually a Google sheet, because we want it to be agile, we want it to change over time. We actually want to adjust what a goal is and determine whether we're going to meet the goal at the midpoint of the year. And if we're not going to meet that goal, why aren't we meeting that goal? Do we need to adjust our strategies, right? So student learning will not progress unless our plans are precise, agile, and really intentional. So that's what we want to show you now. We have been talking about strategic plans, and now we're talking about school improvement and district improvement goals. I just want to draw your attention that they're different things, okay? That right now we're talking about goals and metrics, which will improve that blue circle, quality instruction. So high impact instructional strategies, goals and metrics, professional development and training. There are other things that we do in the green circle in terms of priorities, where we identify our resources and investment, which is going to have an impact on quality instruction. If you recall, I mentioned at the end of this month at the tri-board meeting, we're going to talk more about our strategic priorities, right? We're not talking about our strategic priorities now, we're talking about kind of our district and school improvement goals. And then our values come from kind of our stakeholders. So we'll talk more about that as well. So in essence, we've tried really hard to align our district improvement and our school priorities. A district improvement plan, or a DIP, is primarily driven by the superintendent and the central office team. And a school improvement plan, or a SIP, is driven by the leadership at the school level. But those focus areas need to be aligned, and they all need to be pulling in the same direction. And including teacher goals need to be aligned to school goals and district goals. So as we go through the next part of the presentation, we're going to really spell out how we've tried to align those things, right? It's like, if you probably haven't done this in a while, but if you recall turning in the frequency of a radio, right, and trying to really fine tune that dial, that's kind of what this process looks at. So our district goals, we're focused in 4 areas. High impact instructional strategies, they're included in our DIP and SIP. These high leverage areas are research-based and shown to improve student learning. And we want to be able to see these practices in our classroom and have teachers understand their importance, and teachers collectively grow in those high impact instructional areas. We have student achievement goals in 2 parts: standardized achievement, which we've just talked about, but also our performance-based assessments. And finally, our 3rd goal is focused on family engagement and school climate, which we care deeply about. So I'm going to take you through each of those areas. First, I promise I'm going to talk to you about high impact instructional strategies, but we have to kind of set this up and talk a little bit about what that means. We believe that 95% of what teachers do in their classroom is effective. Okay. However, the different strategies that they use in their classroom have a different impact on student learning, right? So what we are going to try to do is talk about the effect size of each of these particular strategies. And researchers have used the effect size value to describe the impact on student achievement over time. So if you look at the top right-hand picture, an effect size is the level of the numbers going across that dashboard from -2 to 0 to 0.2 to 0.4 to 0.6, all the way around to 1.2. Anything above 0.4 has a higher impact on student achievement. That's really where we want to focus, right? That is kind of the blue area. Let's talk about some examples. A small effect size is 0.2, a medium effect size is 0.4, and a large effect size is above that. Homework has a 0.29 effect on student achievement, okay? 0.29. If we were going to go into the home and visit our students in the home, that would have a 0.29 effect on student achievement as well. Summer school has an effect size of 0.23. And technology has an effect size by itself in isolation as 0.21, right? Some other examples there are if we teach students how to summarize information, that has a 0.66 impact on student learning. Response to intervention, which is what Devin, your question was to Dr. Pearson-Hugo earlier, that has a 1.29 effect on student achievement. And collective teacher efficacy is actually off the chart. It's the highest effect size possible. And what that is that teachers understand individually what their impact on student learning is, and they make learning visible in their classroom. But if we all do the same thing in a school, that collective efficacy actually has a huge effect size of 1.59. If you look at the bottom right-hand picture, you see the yellow bars there. When we said before that 95% of what we do in the classroom has an impact on student learning, but there are different things that have different size impact. The yellow zone has an impact between 0.2 and 0.4, right? What we need to do are shift all of those individual practices in the yellow and make sure that they're in the green, okay? So now that we've keyed that up, what are the high impact instructional strategies that we've selected? These are the practices that are in the green, right? Oh, sorry, that in the green from the previous slide, but in the zone of desired effects here. Learning intentions has an effect size of 0.75. And learning intention is a statement of what the student is expected to learn in a given lesson. It's basically setting goals, right? Success criteria has an effect size of 0.88. Success criteria means that teachers and students can gauge their progress towards learning, and students know what is expected of them, right? So you have clear goals and students know how they're going to be successful. Feedback is, the purpose of feedback is to close the gap between the present and the desired performance. And it just basically means that when teachers provide feedback on how students, what their the learning goals are, that has an effect size of 0.7. Classroom discussion has an effect size of 0.82, meaning that when the students are talking about their learning, it increases active engagement and has an impact on student learning. The final one is higher impact questions. And that simply means that the types of questions we ask in the classroom can actually improve critical thinking, right? So our first district goal are making sure that we are doing these 6 things, these 5 things in the classrooms really well, and that teachers collectively understand them. And so at the beginning of this week, our administrative team actually went into Reading Elementary School, and we looked for these things, and we measured whether these things are happening, and we got some data on that. Our goal is to provide professional development in these areas and to continuously go back in the classroom to see whether we see growth. Because if these high impact instructional strategies have a high impact on student learning, we want to scale them up and make sure that they're happening all the time, right? We started this work last year in the spring, and Dr. Platt and Scott Santoris actually started leveraging that work in the schools as well. This is a document that we developed to really streamline what that looks like in the classroom. So we're modeling, this is what a learning intention looks like, this is what success criteria looks like, and we have a continuum or a rubric of what that looks like in each classroom. So we've developed a document that defines what all of this looks like. Area 2.A is really our student achievement goal. So before you we took you through the data. By June 2023, our goal is that 79% of our grade students in grades 3 to 8 will meet or exceed goal at level 3 and 4. In math, by 2023, 73.5% of our students will meet goal. And in science, by 2023, 75% of our grade 5 students will meet goal, and at least 70% of our grade 8 students will meet goal. The grade 8 science is a bit of an outlier. As John pointed out, these students have already gone on to 9th grade. It's a completely different cohort of students coming in from 7th grade last year. But these are our district level goals. I'm going to skip this tool. One of the things we intend on doing is breaking apart the assessment and providing learning experiences for students in those strands that I've discussed with you before. So what are the weak areas? We intend to actually design performance assessments and measure student progress and give students these assessments more frequently, right? Because if you only give the assessment every May and report the results in October, then you're never actually going to do anything with those results. We actually plan to give assessments like that quite frequently. And so this is a tool where we can actually design an assessment in math based on one of the claims in a particular grade level, design a performance task and actually assess the students in that particular area. So we intend on designing those performance tasks quite frequently. Our second goal related to student achievement are more the formative measures. And in reading, we're going to be using the Funness and Pinnell benchmark assessment. We're going to be set the target at 80% for various grades. Each grade level has a different goal based on a particular grade level. In elementary writing, we're going to be looking at our on-demand writing assessment for narrative, opinion, and information. Middle school reading, we're going to be looking at 80% of our students will meet projected growth rates according to NWEA. Middle school writing, we'll also be looking at the narrative writing assessments, and middle school math, one of our performance assessments is just using the NWEA assessments as well. So these are our district goals. There are individual goals in these areas that the principals are going to talk about, but they're not going to talk about that tonight. That's in our plan. We just didn't want to, we want to show you what those goals are and that we have them, and we don't want to go that deep because it will just take too long. This is just an example of one of our formative assessments that we have from our new math program called Vision Math. It's difficult to see, but essentially those colored bars on the right-hand side are collections of standards. So we gave an assessment in grade 1, and we can identify how students are doing according to each standard using conditional formatting. And students in the green have passed that particular particular standard. Students that are scoring in the red have not met that standard. Students in the yellow have met that standard to a varying degree. Our goal, what you don't see in the black box there, are a list of students' names. So we want to be able to give students these formative assessments and know at the end of every unit how they're doing according to the standards, because the standards are aligned to the targets. So this particular target is looking at addition and subtraction up to 20 for solving word problems. So if we know that some students know that standard and some students don't, what do? We provide intervention in those students. And you go back to the orange dot, nowhere near the blue dot. This is how one of the strategies we use to close the gap. Before we get into goal 3, there was a question tonight about our climate data. And what we've developed is a Safe School Climate website, which is the picture on the left. And what you see on the right is a data visualization of all of our climate questions that we've asked. This is created in Awesome Table, and essentially is going to give our consumer, our stakeholders, the answer to every climate question we've asked and the data, right? So we're going to make this available to the public soon. And there was a question tonight from public comment about where is the climate data. We've designed the dashboard. We're going to give you access to the dashboard, and you can go in and look at every single question.
Except for the open.
Except for the open-ended questions, right? What I've personally found since I've been here a year right now is that the district overly focused on climate data, and we spent far too many calories on looking at data, climate data, what's the climate data? You brought in a statistician because some people believe in the data, some people didn't believe in the data. We talked about sample size. We talked about this so much. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm just going to be honest. Here is the data. Go and look at the climate, look at every single question you want to look at. What districts do is they look at this information and they focus on 1 or 2 areas they want to focus on. So here are the family engagement and climate data goals based on the data that we just mentioned before. Our family engagement goal is that 90% of parents will know how their child is doing before they receive a report card or a grade. Okay, that is the focus area. And the data source is on the right. I have to move the thing again. I know how my child is doing in school before I get my child's report card. 61% strongly agree, 21% agree. This is so important. Parents need to know how their students are doing before they get their grades and their report cards. That's a goal of ours. So we're going to design some action steps around that. We also have 2 goals around school climate. One is that 90% of students will be able to identify a trusted adult to whom they can reach out to for help, and that 90% of students will report that they believe that their students in their school are kind. Okay? These are goals that everyone can agree on. Kindness, trusted adult, and communication. I believe that these are things that we can based on the data sources that we could all buy into, and we'll design some action steps around that. Again, if you want to go back and look at all the questions related to climate, be our guest. We really want to focus on these three important things. Okay? So this part of the presentation is really just the dip. I'm going to delve into this quickly, show you how it works, and then we're going to turn it over to the principals, and they're going to talk about their student improvement goals. Okay. So this is our district improvement plan. And what you'll see across the bottom, I'm just going to walk over here, it's easier, is this is our introduction. This is where the data is. This is priority goal 1, priority goal 2, priority goal 2B, and that's priority goal 2, okay? In every tab, we've identified what our goal is, and we've also identified in our tab what our action steps are, okay? So in priority goal number 1, we've said we want high impact instructional strategies, clear learning intentions, success criteria, students providing evidence, feedback to students, evidence of classroom discussion. Why do we pick those things? Because they have a high effect size. Priority number 2, these goals are related. I've just explained those to you. These are our district level goals around our smarter balanced achievement in reading, writing, and math, and reading and writing, math, and science. So you've got it broken down there. You'll see here that, if I can just make this a bit bigger, that there's a SMART goal, there's the baseline, there's the DERG average, and there's the percent increase. So every goal has a timeline and what the target is and why it's the target. That's priority 2A. Priority 2B, these are all the formative assessments that I mentioned before that we're doing in the district. That are reading, writing, math, middle school, and so on, including we're going to put the high school goals in there as well. Priority number 3 is the family engagement goal and the school climate goal. We have the goal, the measurement, the baseline, and why we're selecting that particular goal because we have the data in there. This is the most important tab. These are the action steps. The action steps are geared towards each of the goals. So action steps, high impact instructional strategies. These are the action steps for high impact instructional strategies at the district level. These are the people who are responsible for leading that work. This is the evidence of success for each of those action steps. This is goal number 2A, improving student learning, standardized measures. These are the things we're going to be doing at the district level to improve our standardized test information, who's responsible for it, and what our evidence of success are. And the same thing for our formative assessments and our family engagement in school goals. We are also just move across here. Okay. In addition to the action steps, we're also identifying in each faculty meeting and department meeting when of these things activities taking place to support those action goals, right? So our principals are saying in the October faculty meeting, we're going to be doing this activity, and that's an action step and it supports our particular goal. Okay. So that is the navigation of our DIP. Okay. It has across the bottom there. It has all the data, our priority goals, and all the actions that go along with that. And then remember, our SIPs are identical to these, but at the school level. Getting back to the presentation. These are now the school improvement goals, high impact instructional strategies, student achievement, family engagement. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and she's going to talk a little bit about some of the goals at Settlement Staples.
Hi, nice to see everyone. So some of the information that Dr. McKinnon shared actually was something that I was going to share. I think some of the test scores indeed are a reflection of something that happened through COVID, or a variety of things that happened through COVID. But one of the things that I think sometimes gets overlooked was the amount of absences, both for the students and for the staff. Everybody really suffered from COVID and were absent for quite a period of time. And you also recall us mentioning from last year, we had significant difficulty securing substitutes because they didn't feel comfortable coming into the building and substituting. So there are all sorts of really unfortunate iterations that happened as a result of COVID in that regard. In terms of the teaching of, reading and writing, I think that up until about March, when the masks came off, there was still a distance between where the teachers taught and where the students learned that is just unfamiliar in an elementary school. In an elementary building, the children come together in a meeting area first for the classroom teacher to model whatever is the teaching focus. The kids turn and talk to their little partner, they practice, the teacher gauges, okay, they have an understanding of what I'm teaching, and then off they go. Well, then she goes over to her reading table to work with a small group or a math group. It's a smaller setting. We do one-on-one, and most of that did not take place to the frequency that we're used to and we know is good practice until the masks started coming off. And then once the masks came off, I think you saw such a tremendous amount of relief. It most definitely got louder. But some of those natural things that kids need to do, like turning and talking to a friend to process something, to practice something, really took place in a meaningful way from then on. But so too, we looked at how the teachers were progressing through all of the units of study, both in math and in reading and in writing. And we did notice it moved much slower than it had in years past. For many of the grade levels, they couldn't get to one of the genres, which was opinion writing. For some of the grade levels, they couldn't get to the very last math unit. So then ultimately, they were doing their formative assessments, which Dr. McKinnon mentioned is Fountas and Pinnell. And when I looked at the end of year data, so for those of you that know the reading levels, in Fountas and Pinnell, by the end of kindergarten, the kids need to read either at a level D or E or higher. 74% of last year's kindergarten kids met that target. At the end of first grade, we want the students to be reading at a J or K or higher. 58% of the kids met that target. In grade 2, they need to reach M or N. 65% met that target. So now it relates to grade 3. In grade 3, we wanted the students to reach a P or a Q at the end of their 3rd grade year. 54% of the kids met that reading target. Then you look at 3rd grade reading performance. Where is it? ELA, grade 3 was 65% of the kids. So it wasn't altogether a huge surprise to us. Last year's grade 4, we needed them to read at an S or a T. 73% met that target or higher. And as you can tell, the grade 4 kids, 88% met or exceeded that standard. So let's compare to the math. So math last year was the new program, Envision. And with every single new program, there's always some challenges along the way. But the teachers worked beautifully on following that program with fidelity. So there are different assessments they do over the course, units, tests that they do over the course of the math program. But what's interesting is the end of year assessment, because that gives you an indication over the course of that particular year, what were their mastery with regard to the standards, which are in fact aligned to the Common Core. So on the end of year, we're looking at 80% or better. The kindergarten kids, 74% met 80% or better. First grade, 75% reached 80% or better. The end of grade 2, 52%. Grade 3, 22% met 80 or above. And then if you look at the grade 3 math scores, 66%. At the end of grade 4, Yeah, the end of year grade 4 test, 79% met an 80% or better. So it wasn't a huge surprise. So I'm not going to read the goals to you. You can certainly read them to yourself, and you could see what the DIRG average is. Our grade 4 students last year really did a tremendous job. Worked so hard. So the focus for this year as it relates to these goals and the work of the teachers, and Devin, you mentioned it earlier, the number of kids that we had in intervention last year were far and above higher than we had ever had in years past. So you only have so many staff. And in order for intervention to work well, you can't have large groups of kids, particularly the kids who are tier 3. Ideally, you want 2 kids at most. You try really hard to get one-on-one to give those kids every single day intervention. So we did the best that we could. So we know we can do better. So the focus this year is largely on tier 1 interventions that must happen in the classroom. So on Tuesday, one of the areas that we focused on for classroom teachers was on tier 1 interventions. What are some good practices for ELA and for math? But more to the point, we asked them to keep records. We need them to keep very close eye on any student that they think bubble to the top as someone we should discuss at a student intervention team meeting. And even if we as a team decided not to pick up that child for tier 2 or tier 3, let's say a teacher came forward with 6 kids, all 6 of those kids, the ones that were deemed tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, the teacher must work with that child every single day. We need a record on the date that they meet. We need the focus of instruction on those tier 1 interventions. And then we need periodic progress monitoring data. So if we were to give this particular task 5 times, the child 3 out of the 5 times can demonstrate an understanding of that skill or that strategy. And then once they see that the child is proficient, the child can then be dismissed from the tier 1. They must keep a record of that. The coaches, we have 2 instructional coaches in literacy, but we also have a remedial reading teacher who most definitely could be a coach. And then we have the 1 math specialist. Their work this year, common planning time they have with teachers, release times that we have for professional development, and certainly during their prep time, they're going to be conferring with these coaches to really build their skills and their repertoire for the frequency and the intensity of these tier 1 interventions, so we can support these kids, because all of them can't go into tier 2 and tier 3 because the numbers are pretty high. With regard to science, we were really proud of the science program, the work that 5th grade teachers have done. They are fantastic teachers who collaborate really well, who are committed to providing as much science instruction as they can each day. Stephanie does a superb job providing professional development for them, and they are good to go. So that, in fact, are the smarter, balanced goals that the school has set for the upcoming year. Okay.
Yeah, if you go to the next slide, I think it's a summary of what you just talked about.
Just the,
It's
yeah. What?
You hit the right arrow.
Right now?
The mouse is not.
Oh, yeah, it's a quirky mouse.
Oh. The button pressing. No. Okay. I'll just stand here.
There we go. These are the sums. This is what you really just talked about, right? These are your
Okay, that's what I really just talked about.
That's the question.
You may.
In addition to the F and T, are we also doing something that's like more like the DIPPLs or something that
Yeah,
demonstrates?
they do
monitor
those for universal screenings.
Okay.
Yeah, running records for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Any more questions for Kim? All right.
Thank you.
Steve?
Hey, come on. great my part. With me. And so, we're working on as well. So, as you heard before and saw before, some of the numbers here are pretty concerning. So, I'm really trying to dig into the standardized test scores here. And kind of arbitrarily, you can look kind of down where we set our goal this year was for generally a 5% increase. We know we're not going to catch up. The science behind this, 80% of our kids should be getting to where we need them. And then the other 20% are going to be picked up a little bit in special ed and then with some intervention support. And those are more in-depth cases. But so my goal is over the next few years is really to get us back in the 80s. That's where we really should be. We're not going to get that all in one bite, right? So we're going to take some time to get at those. So generally across the board, I thought a 5%. We thought a 5% goal was pretty reasonable. It was rigorous, reasonable. To John's point earlier, this is really 5 kids, and so we've been able to kind of identify who are the students who are really cuspy, who are really kind of maybe just below those high 2s getting into 3, and we call those our discussion students, and Anne's going to talk about those discussion students in a second. But on top of that, so we could move the needle a little bit for 5 kids. But I don't know if that's really what the real work here is. There's more work than that there. But we're going to do that, and we're going to do some other things as well. And I think that over time that we will, as we continue to move on, we had a high number of students in different tiered support last year, much higher than that kind of 15% that you typically see. And so as students start to exit out of that and we can become more focused on the 3 or 4 or 5 kids rather than the 15 to 18 kids we had last year, then we can we think our intervention numbers will improve as well. The one that's really been killing me here is the science scores. That was really surprising. And I hate being surprised by scores. I want to know exactly how they're going to do. And some of the other scores weren't super surprising. I would have liked the 8th grade math to be higher as well. Not surprising, there was a correlation between the kids who did poorly in math and the kids who were struggling in reading. They also did poorly on the NGSS, because the NGSS is really a reading test in a lot of ways. So if your reading skills are down, it's going to be a really hard test to take. So we set that number a lot higher. I think there's a lot of anomalies involved with that number. We actually, and he called the state and was like, something happened. You guys screwed this up.
You're like, no, take it.
And we spent a lot of time this summer when we got the numbers trying to really analyze what happened here. One of the things we know that the calendar was really tight in the spring for the testing. We wanted to give the kids as much time to get the content down as possible. And you end up with 8th graders who take the 3 SBOS tests, the 3 tests in Smart Balance. They take the PSATs, and then they took the NGSS. NGSS was at the end. We gave them as much time as possible, but it was and when they did the PSATs, if you remember, I gave a nice one of my administrative reports at the end of the year. I was so proud. They had 100-point growth, and we had really focused on it. They had some really low numbers in the fall in the PSAT. So the teachers set goals with the kids. They individualized each goal. They worked on that. They had individualized differentiation they were working on with teachers' plans. They reflected with their teachers and counselors, and they did exactly what we would expect. We do all those high impact instructional strategies. They killed it. And they went and took the NGSS, and I think they were
like out of gas.
They're out of gas. Yeah, I think they didn't take it as seriously. Something about the PSAT had some gravitas to it, right? And to College Board, and then they're like, yeah, there's another test. So there was a little bit of a feeling around that. So we're looking at kind of adjusting the calendar so that doesn't happen again. Although we're stuck with certain windows, and it's still going to be a little more packed than I prefer. But we also had a high number of absences, and the 8th grade science teacher in particular had a tough road with kids and COVID and stuff like that. So we had a high number of absences. We had we didn't have any interim assessments. So the interim assessments that Stephanie talked about nicely before, and Jason talked about, that they exist for the math and the reading for the SBOC. But in science, they did exist, but they were the flawed questions. So as they develop these adaptive tests, they throw out questions because they're not reliable over time. And instead of just throwing them out completely, they put them into the IABs and for the science, And so kids could practice and get better at the tools and things like that. Our science teachers never saw much value in giving you the IABs. We'll teach good curriculum, we'll have good practices, and the scores will come out good, and they had for a long time. But now we have a whole new bank of IABs for science, so we're looking for, that's one of the things we're looking at, so we can really track this over time. So I won't be surprised again next year, because I hate being surprised. The other thing is, as Stephanie said earlier, is a little bit of drift from the curriculum. So we did a really useful exercise. We looked at all the standards that are expected to be taught in the middle school years, and they're extensive. There's 3 big buckets. You have cross-cutting standards, you have engineering practices, and then you have these individual strands that have to be discretely taught. And I had the teachers, this is our first department meeting, I said, we got to do this. I want you to tell me where you're teaching these strands. And when they came back to me, they said, we're teaching most of them, but there's a few we're not hitting. We're not hitting. And it's not because they are intentionally or blowing these things off. They saw kids had needs in certain areas, so they kind of downshifted and spent more time in certain ones, and they didn't have time to get to others. So there are straight up whole strands of the NGSS that didn't get taught to our current 9th graders from Easton. So, so that is something we've identified, and it's one of our action steps that we've been working on, and we're trying to crosswalk that with how the kids performed to really hone in on how they do there. So that's been a lot of our work. And we're kind of taking a similar approach in the other grades, really looking at where are the standards we're teaching, what's the curriculum that's actually being taught, because there was drift in areas, and out of the best of intentions, the teachers wanted to slow down when kids needed more help, not just move to the next topic. But there's a cost to that, and the cost is that you don't get to all the aspects that you need to get to. And so I've already talked about this hopefully it's a little more articulate there about the NGSS work, and those disciplinary core ideas is what I was talking about. We've identified the areas of strength, crosswalking between how the current 9th graders did and where we had gaps, and then just making modifications. This is hard when we have 3 teachers, though, who don't get a lot of time together throughout the course of the year, and they don't have someone overseeing it. So having Reading, to Randy's point earlier, Reading stayed steady. They had a captain at the helm who was saying, no, we got to move on. I get this. We got to move to the next topic. You're never going to get to these other topics. The 3 teachers are embedded as, I want to help this child in this class, which is what we want.
Well, you're balancing that with what we've talked about earlier tonight, which is we have kids that need a little bit of help and a little bit of coaching from the teacher, and so how do you devote your time? You want to make sure everybody is coming along. So is there any correlation, and it's probably a dumb question, between grades, GPA, and our testing?
There probably is a correlation. I bet it's not as strong as we would like. One of the interesting phenomena I've found here is kids do really well on their report card. And there's a lot that goes into that. There's participation grades, there's homework grades. Kids can complete a lot of work, and that gets averaged in to how they do on assessments, and it tends to, in my opinion, and I could be wrong on this, but it inflates the grades a bit. So detangling participation effort, being prepared for class, coming on time to class, with understanding the standards is a different thing. Other districts that I've worked in have detangled those by doing progression scale grades, moving away from letter grades altogether and doing progression scales towards how the students are mastering towards a particular standard, which is a very interesting approach. And then also rating kids on how well their habits of success, how well they're prepared for class and the homework completion and the participation, the collaboration. So we can do that, but letter grades, people like letter grades because they see, I know what a B is, right? Do they see a approaching standard? I don't know, what does that mean? Is that good? So it takes kind of a real cultural and structural shift to go to that, but you get better kind of on time or in time reporting on where kids are in relation to the standards we expect them to be at. So similar work going on in math and reading, although those numbers weren't as concerning, but I'd like us, again, I expect us over a couple of years as we kind of normalize our instruction, get back to good teaching, and we have less kids in intervention, that we can really hone this. And by the way, I didn't get to do we skipped over kind of administrative work, but for the first time since I started here, we have all of our staff hired. We finally got our last math interventionist, a 0.5 position we've had for a couple of years, and hard to hire. It's not official yet, I won't tell you the name, but she's great. Very excited to get her in. She's coming back into the game. She's been raising kids for a couple of years, but and she worked in another state, and she's high end. So we just have to go through some fingerprinting stuff with her, and she could be in as early as next week. But now we have the full team of interventionists for the first time. We have more subs on board than we've had in a couple of years, and I think those things, now I can pull the science teachers into a half day, and we can work together on something because I have enough subs to be able to do that. So it's all, it's kind of there's a lot of pieces into this that go on through this. So a similar approach to math and reading. I did want to give Andy a chance to talk a little bit about the family engagement piece and some of the like the students we're identifying and for our discussion students. I think that's a good one for you to jump in on.
Yeah, and you explained it pretty well already. We've talked to the board several times about what our SRPI process looks like. We have a robust data teaming model that tracks the data and information for every student, and we meet every 6 weeks as a school level data team. In between there, each week there's a different student intervention team meeting, whether it be consults with grade level teams, whether we're meeting with specials. And when you look at the massive data spreadsheet, it has every child and it is color coded. The color coding is about growth. It's not about who's necessarily below benchmark. It's about who's growing or who's not. So we might have students who are at 4, but they've plateaued. So they're not necessarily all in like green, let's go. It's this child, something's going on that they're not growing anymore. So we're very thoughtful in how we color code and who is standing out as needing something, right? And I speak very generically when I say something because if you haven't hung out in middle school, like every 10 minutes, you need something different. So our discussion students are students who time and time again are like right there, like maybe they need some intervention. Oh, but then they did really well on that test, or then look at their NWA scores, but like, and you're like, guys, you're killing me. It's a roller coaster here. But that's middle school, right? We have good days, we have bad days. We also have lots of emotional components and life that's impacting our ability to focus, to stay engaged, to care. And a lot of times, Randy, to your point before about classroom grades versus test scores, if you bring a kid into Mrs. Matthews' science class and they do an experiment, that kid is so into it, they are learning and their grades are like out of the park, right? And then I'm like, here is the SBA, please log in and take it for the next 3 hours. They're like, click, click, eyes closed, right? So that assessment is not engaging to them. So how do we talk about those kids in a way where we can support that buy-in, that maturation of like, why does this matter? And being proud of how far they've come and showing that learning. And so a lot of times our discussion students, those high 2, low 3s, in addition to 1,000 other data points, are just those students who they wobble, they ebb and flow. We can't necessarily tell what they are very good at because there's so many other little things going on. And those are the students who oftentimes are in and out of our SIT process. And we just want to make sure we like never miss something or never let them slip through the cracks. And like that's often the students who need the most attention because it's more just about like, we see you, you're valued, you're here, and you've got it in you, and we're going to pull it out, right? So that's what we do a lot of work in our SRT process with. But this year specifically, we're going to be doing some more tier 1 interventions. So tier 1 is in the classroom itself, right? So we've talked about differentiation for like 6,000 years, right? But now there are a lot more specific strategies that get to be tracked in the classroom before someone's going to a small group intervention, right? And so with us moving out of COVID land, and small groups can happen and one-on-ones can happen and turn and talks can happen, all those really good things, it's gonna bump up the tier 1, which then lowers the numbers in tier 2 and 3, right? So that's the ultimate goal is that we can get through here. Simultaneously, Dr. McKinnon talked about the collective efficacy of the staff. Think back to when you were in school, most of the time, I think my teachers were just like in their rooms, in their islands, right? It's kind of like an island. They didn't like co-teach or like hang out in each other's rooms or in my world, which happened to be this world still. I just looked at, there's a different carpet. But so what we're working really hard on and at Keller is that like open the doors, like knock down the walls. This is where you can learn from each other. So our theme this year for everybody is find your strength, build it, share it. So in their student learning objectives, the staff is including requirements for themselves for classroom visitations. So they have to have at least an hour where they're hanging out in other rooms and just learning. They're walking through, they're talking to each other. And simultaneously what that's doing is like, is building this collective efficacy of like, ooh, I like that. I could try that in that room. Hey, I saw you're struggling with that. I just figured that out. You want to come in my room? And now all of a sudden the thing that has one of the highest effect sizes from John Hattie is now our reality. And it takes trust. It takes not feeling like you're going to be judged. It takes courage. And if all of that has this high effect size, what that will do is spill right over into our students to skyrocket back to where they need to be. Their flights in the professional learning slows. Finally, our family and student engagement. We do have Wingman coming back, which is awesome. That was here a couple of years ago through the Sandy Hook Promise, Dylan Wings of Change. They are all about student empowerment to have the students really take the lead in improving the climate in their building. Our parent coffees, instead of just support group sessions, which are also really cathartic, we're going to have more of a book club format. So we're going to have some articles so that we feel like we learned something and we all feel a little bit more equipped to hang out with adolescents all day long. We did redesign our Hkms advisory program just this past PD day, and it's ready to launch next Wednesday. A lot of that redesign was built on a book club we're in the middle of called One Trusted Adult. And as always, Steve and I are working diligently on our weekly newsletter and podcast. I'm sorry if you're getting sick of our voice, but we hope that those different formats are making it a little bit more accessible for everyone to at least hear bits and pieces of Life at Keller.
Yeah, we're trying to bring more students and teachers into
Right.
those, so they're providing a lot of pieces of the newsletter and podcast. Any other?
Right, any questions?
Love the newsletter.
Yeah.
The pictures are great. Thank you.
Okay. So this meeting started 6,000 years ago, it seems. We apologize. Just imagine spending 2 days on this, and that's what we did this summer. So we're deeply grateful to the administrators and the leaders who helped put together this plan. We started working on this over the summer. And this is the district improvement plan, the DIP, and you can see here priority 1, priority 2. The school improvement plans are exactly the same, just for coherence. You can see the tabs going across the bottom. So there's really strong alignment between a school improvement plan and a district improvement plan. So in conclusion, we're going to use data to drive instruction. We're going to identify those students who need help. We're going to provide interventions for those students according to that data. Has a high effect size 1.29. We have a strong ZIP and SIP. We're going to monitor our goals. We're going to look at our metrics, and we're going to analyze our progress towards those goals with clear action steps. We're going to focus on those high impact instructional strategies, define what excellence looks like in our classrooms, and scaffold our teachers working towards that vision. At the end of this month, we're going to start identifying our strategic priorities, and we're going to ask you a question. What resources do you think that we need? Do we need a stick teacher? We don't have one. Reading has one. Is there a correlation between their scores and our scores? Do we need additional interventionists? Do we need an English language learner teacher to focus on that high needs group? If you're convinced that our metrics, goals, and actions are aligned and they're going to work, what other investments do you think that you can provide us to help us be successful in our growth and improving student performance? If I told you that for $140,000, we can increase student performance by 8% and be at the top of the dirt, would you place that bet? And that's the kind of a conversation you need to have soon about resources and investments. Because I feel like this team and central office has come up with a really good game plan, focusing on district improvement and school improvement. Now we just need to partner with you about additional investments that we can strengthen. So that concludes the presentation. Happy to take additional questions, or we could certainly move on to the next. John?
I think you have laid out a strategy, a set of tactics, and a sort of process that is very sound. And I'm excited by everything that I'm seeing here. I love the, what you're doing in Google Sheets to roll up all the goals and to measure and to, I love that. I think it's reminiscent of what we do with the budget, and I think that worked really well. And now we have a process going forward that we can say, cool, rinse, repeat, let's do this again, and then we can build upon our successes. How do we make sure that we do that here? How do we make sure that this process, that the strategy and the tactics that you're aimed at here, we're building on it instead of going rail to rail, and kind of finding our way with our eyes closed, right? That has been a problem, at least in my opinion, for the last 10 years that I've been paying attention to education in this town, is that, we have a really good idea, and then next year we have a really good idea, and the next year we have a really good idea. It'd be wonderful if this is the really good idea that we move forward with and build on, going forward.
I liked that it felt that it wasn't just an executive presentation and at the senior administration level, it really felt like it went down into the classroom, the plan, and that was that felt good hearing how it's getting rolled into the actual classroom.
And just to build off, I guess, what John was saying, I also agree. I loved hearing from the different team members. I think that was really lovely. But at what interval do you think it would be helpful to have the board, I guess, check in, like where you come and say, hey, let's actually go back to our strategic plan, our DIP and our SIPs, and look at this spreadsheet and see how we're tracking against our goals. Is that a helpful exercise just to hold accountability, but also to remind, I think, the board and the public, hey, we do have these plans. This is probably what a 3 or 5 year type of progression. And if we only looked at it every year, it'd probably not be in that. So what is that? The right cadence? You don't have to answer that now, but just as a thought provoking.
Well, we should definitely review mid-year how we're doing in certain areas and give you an update. Like we said, we're going to be going into the classroom, looking at these high impact instructional strategies frequently. And every time we go in, we're providing feedback. I think we're in phase 1 right now, where we're just getting teachers comfortable with the idea that these are the strategies that we've selected. We've presented that to them last year, but now we're going in and actually getting some data on that. We're going to give that data back to them. We were talking about this the other day, that phase 2 would look like we go in, we evaluate these particular set of strategies. We use a Google form to identify and the metrics. We have a tool that we've already built in that particular area. And as we walk out of the room, we went around into 30 classrooms. We saw 30 different episodes of learning last time earlier the week. Phase 2 would be, we collect that data, we hit submit, and as we're walking on to the next classroom, that teacher gets an email about what we just saw, and it's all very focused on feedback. But I love that you just said, when can we come back and look at the DIP and the SIP, and can we, because you're using the language now you're using the language that we just used, and that's a big step forward.
I really liked that you're going to be more frequently having the assessments. I think that's going to be really positive, because you can benchmark not just from your administration, but actual assessments from the students. And I think that's the best way to see if what we're implementing is actually working. Okay? The formative assessments.
Right. You talked about target levels for every student. And once upon a time, there was a Connecticut mastery test that gave you 26 strands of a detailed analysis in terms of how well the child did at any one particular area. I was encouraged to hear Stephanie say that the new or the SBAC tests give you some of that information. Is it enough to be able to drill down so that we know that Bill and John and Pete are really having a problem with fractions, as opposed to saying, well, we've got to get this person up, so let's try to take everything that we're doing and move it all up, as opposed to we want to zero in on fractions and make that our focus.
We need to do both. We need to focus on Bill, Joe, and Pete, right? And work out what their strengths and weaknesses are. And then in addition, we need to recognize that claim 10, everyone's having a problem with claim 10. Let's go in and reteach claim 10.
Right. Okay.
Sold. I think that if the buildings are sold and all the teachers can do this, it's a lot. To me, it just feels like a lot. But if you think you've got the troops, all engaged and they can do this, they can really, because they have to ultimately pull this off, right? I mean, you all put a ton of work into this and you've convinced us that this looks really good, but they have to execute it. You don't think it's too much for them to be able to execute? The building, the teachers?
Well, we're going to break it into small parts and do small pieces at a time. When I presented this work to each faculty last year, the one thing I said to help them feel more comfortable about that is that, you were doing these things in the classroom already, right? Setting goals, letting students know what success looks like, giving them feedback are just things you already do. And you just need to make sure you do them, to Steve's point, more often, right? Is that what you said?
Do these things.
Whatever it is. Yeah, so those things, we just need to make sure that we're really focusing on it and measuring them. Okay. All right. Thank you.
60 middle school social studies curriculum changes. No. So we left off at the last meeting that there were changes recommended and that there were going to be questions maybe posed to Stephanie. That some of those things occur.
Yes, so one of you shared some questions with me a couple of weeks ago. Earlier this week, I responded to those questions. I provided about 5 different documents that included communications regarding curriculum updates over the last several years. Some of them were board packets with reports from me. Some of them were minutes from curriculum committee meetings, or other information that have been shared with the board. In addition to that, I shared curriculum content information from the Atlas archives. And I think I explained in the last meeting that there was certainly a delay in gathering that information due to the compressed formatting in the archives of Atlas. So it did take some work to adjust the formatting. I hope that those of you who received it were able to read it with a magnifying glass perhaps. But that's the information that was in Atlas. So that's the curriculum prior to any revisions. At the June 2022 joint Easton Reading Curriculum Committee meeting, all members of the curriculum committee received an email from me with links to information so that they could review information in advance of the meeting. And we explained that the social studies curriculum had been revised and the pacing revised. And in addition, the Holocaust and genocide instruction was embedded within 3 different units across the middle school span. So it's unfortunate that we cannot replay that June curriculum committee meeting because we had 2 teachers attend that meeting who provided, I think, so much of the information that you all have been looking for in terms of the thought process that went behind an emphasis in a particular grade level or moving, for instance, 1 unit from grade 7 to grade 6, which the state allows us to do within grade 6 and 7. There can be adjustments. I am happy to hear your questions
any concerns you might have, it makes sense to me that if you have further questions, and some of the questions I heard at our last meeting had to do with tone and a concern possibly about an emphasis on inhumanity, and that perhaps our written documents were not capturing what the teachers have shared with me. And I think that what they shared with the curriculum committee in June, which is that so much of the message in this teaching has to do with the resilience and hope that comes out of difficult times, both in history and then in terms of some contemporary examples. So if that's not clear in the written documents, that's really helpful feedback for us. And I think that's something that I can discuss with the teachers. So at this point, I've shared the information. It has not been shared with the whole board. So I responded to the board member who asked me the questions, and then copied Randy as the chair. So with that, that's where we are.
Any other comments, thoughts?
I was the board member that you said it to. And I thank you for that. I did try to respond as quickly as I could. I think there's still some questions that, that need further clarification. The topic of genocide is in every, it's in the 6th grade course of studies, in the 7th grade, it's in the 8th grade. We talk about the mental fragility of our kids, and yet we're going to talk about we're going to teach them about some pretty horrific things. Now, when the state came out with their declaration in terms of the Holocaust and the genocide that was associated with it, I personally thought that was a great idea, because that's certainly a very vital part of history that we should never ever forget. Not sure why we would concentrate on Rwanda, and as it says in the write-up,
It's a more contemporary example.
okay, well, it just talks about that in Africa, the 4 things that the students are going to be working on are coming to understand are natural resources, conflict and war, imperialism, hate, bias, discrimination, violence, and genocide. That sounds like a very difficult and negative approach. And certainly, it's just, I mean, once again, it's showing man's inhumanity to man. It's gone on since the beginning of time. We certainly need to talk about it, because that is the world that was behind this. And if you want people not to repeat that, then that is important to teach them what happened. But by the same token, I think that I don't know that you need to pound that nail so hard that it becomes part of everything that's being done. Not everything, but a good chunk of what's being done in social studies.
So I can share that as the teachers and I worked over a couple of years to really think carefully about how to weave in the Holocaust specifically as an event in history, and more generally an understanding of genocide, both in history and in terms of contemporary examples. They really thought very carefully about using the curriculum and the jumping off points. So in the history of Europe in 6th grade, that was a very logical place to teach about the Holocaust. When they thought about, as the students moved through the grade and their understanding, their maturity, their ability to make connections grows greater as they mature, they thought about how to embed examples of genocide and the criteria, the international criteria of genocide into 2 units. So genocide is not the entire unit. So within a unit, they learn, so the example about the unit on Rwanda is a contemporary example of genocide. So giving the teachers the ability to control the instruction in some ways And I know that it doesn't show in the written documents, and I hear that feedback. But it allows them to control the access to information that the students have. So while the students get interested in something, if they were left to their own devices to go off into the internet, I think that's where you have a much greater risk of exposure to graphic, violent, highly disturbing images. With the teacher facilitating the instruction, there's some control over what the students are exposed to. And then again, the messages. And the message is not entirely about hate and killing, but a lot of the message is that this was clearly a time of conflict in this country. And look at how the people, how they grew as a result of this terrible time in relatively recent history, right? So some of this is also one of our teachers received a grant, a teacher in Reading, to travel to Rwanda to learn more about that area of our world and to speak to people and to learn about that culture so that she in turn could bring back that understanding to her colleagues and say, here are some things that I learned, here are some things learning from the people, which is not entirely the message of hate and the attempt to erase an entire culture, religion, race, which is what they learned about genocide. When you talk about genocide in the discussion of Trail and Tears, this is an opportunity for students to apply the criteria that they have to this event in history and question, is this an example of genocide? And if so, how? And this is again, the integration of their English language arts skills as well, because they're raising the question and then they have to find evidence with the teacher's facilitation so that they can make the argument.
Then why wouldn't that have been in the state and national standards? It was on the right, I'm sorry, on the far left-hand side, for anything other than the Holocaust and the genocide associated.
So the state framework predates the expectation from the state that these things are taught, and the state, until the reading legislation that we shared with you tonight, does not typically tell us exactly how
Right.
or where we place it.
Never
There
has.
is some more local control there.
Right.
And so that's why the example I just gave you about Rwanda made some good sense. We had some teacher who had obviously firsthand professional learning. And so while they could have chosen, unfortunately, a number of examples, that's why they landed on Africa. Africa was already part of the curriculum. So let's use
Right.
this as the jumping off place. And again, it is part of one unit. It is not the unit in its entirety in terms of the focus on genocide.
I would also offer that talking about the precipitating factors, talking about imperialism and natural resources and the sort of struggle of those things helps to explain what sort of leads to those situations when it's not just pure evil and hatred. And so it helps the sort of framing of that for the students to understand that there are a sort of number of variables that come into play that sort of lead down that path. And it's not just the world is awful and everybody's terrible and, you know, now you're in 6th grade, right? Like,
Well,
it can be more about I start to see the complexity of the world.
This information that was handed out does not give a very wide lens of what all these things were going to be or supposed to be or whatever. So I see this and I marked it up pretty good. And I say, no, wait a minute. This is not what we've done. We know that other districts in the area are not doing anything with Rwanda, which I guess wouldn't be surprising because we're basing it on one teacher's experience going there.
Well, they may or may not.
Yeah,
I would
we
have
don't
to
know,
honestly survey the other districts in our area to find out exactly what their implementation looks like. So in some cases, there's some flexibility in terms of the teacher's ability to select a contemporary example and then teach into that contemporary example. I mean, we want our teachers to have some flexibility with current events, right? So there's a lot of things that occur in our world that are teachable moments. And so if that is a more compelling and engaging experience for the students, well, then the teachers would switch that out, and that happens.
And a lot of that context was given as a part of the curriculum committee meeting. And it stinks that we, didn't have the OWL, because that, it facilitates the ability for us to, sort of play this out onto YouTube and then have the recording of it. Because it was a really great discussion and the teachers put a ton of time into that presentation. And, I think if we have additional specific questions, we should, the right venue for that is to bring that to the curriculum committee next to make sure that they can prepare for that conversation and address any of the specific concerns and talk about the ways that it's being taught, sort of the ways that they're doing this. And I think the right venue for that is to sort of deep dive into the curriculum.
Another option could be to bring our social studies teachers to a meeting, to a board meeting, and talk about this is the scope and sequence. These are the concepts that we teach. Sometimes in curriculum, even though you have a written curriculum, you actually zoom in on a particular area and spend more time there because students may be interested in it, and you may skim over other areas, and so, but you may not see that on paper. So it might be helpful for teachers to come in and say, this is what we teach, this is where we spend our time. Students are really interested in this particular topic. Teachers will tell you, sometimes we really have to try to engage students in this particular topic, right? And it's a process, right? And they, so, I guess that's one option, right? Go back to the curriculum committee, but we need clear guidance, right? So do your questions, Jeff, about the frequency of these concepts mean that you want us to go back and take another look at this and reconsider the work we've done? Or does it mean something else? And so we have a menu here. Yeah, so the menu is put a motion on the floor, and you either accept the changes or don't accept the changes. You want more information, but you have to tell us what it is that you want and provide us with some guidance to go back to the curriculum committee. Another option could be we have a meeting, we bring some teachers in, we hear kind of what's happening in the classroom, right?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So is the concern that just the topics at hand? And obviously these are heavy topics. In 7th grade, it's one of 13 concepts that kids study. Or is it, and would it maybe be helpful to better understand kind of, to Stephanie's point earlier, like it's not consuming the entire unit of Africa, it's a subsection of a unit, like maybe better understanding like the length of day, the number of days, or something that helps, like a percentage or something that helps like quantify, so that it's, because I think what I'm hearing, and I could be hearing wrong, so feel free to correct me, is there's a lot of highlighted things on this page. It feels like it could be a big, like a substantial change in the amount of time spent. And like, so how would it help to quantify, like in kind of better understanding of like how much time is spent, and then maybe a little more of the how something is taught?
Well, that's from 20,000 feet, and I think it's a very good idea, but I'm not sure where the time comes to be able to do something.
I've designed curriculum a couple of different ways. Sometimes you design and you say, here are the standards, here are the questions, here are the assessments, major concepts, right? Other times I've designed curriculum where I've literally mapped out everything for teachers, right? From here are the 4 or 5 major units, and here are the teaching points, the lessons for every single unit. And sometimes, to your observation, is that you can actually identify how many exact units or lessons you're actually spending on a particular topic. And you can map that out for the entire year, because
it may not be exact, but like, hey, at this unit that is 10 weeks long, we really spend 10% of our time, or just kind of like, I feel like we're there again, what I'm seeing and hearing is this is a big change. I think when we addressed it on the curriculum committee, we were really thinking about the state mandate, ensuring that we are compliant with state law, and heard from teachers that they were looking to incorporate it in a way that was already very natural in the instruction, but that also wasn't the central focus of the study of Africa, Europe, or the United States of American history. And so, but I'm hearing some things that are like, is this all encompassing? Like, are we going to spend all of 7th grade or the entire unit of Africa on this one concept versus like, or is it even 25%? And so I think there's some value maybe in thinking about not necessarily specific exact days, but like just an overall like better understanding of when this change was made by the teachers in their, in their work, they weren't thinking, how much were they thinking of time? And then how does it blend into maybe some of the other pieces of other concepts that are within that set of instruction?
Yeah, I'll say, I think the paper's almost maybe doing us a bit of a disservice because I don't have the benefit of any of the teacher conversations that led into this document. And so my takeaway is teach it, by all means teach it, but then I thought every single year we're teaching it. So yes, it's how do we arrive at that conclusion versus Darien that just does it in 7th grade, right? So, and I really tried to look at our peer school districts to see what I could learn about how they adopted the standards and where they're doing it. And it's a big mishmash of stuff because some's available, some's not. But I wanted to see because I thought, yeah, well, where does it most naturally fit? How did the teachers come to this decision? How much of it is in 6th grade and 7th grade and 8th grade? I have no argument about the examples or the approach. I just wanted to know a little bit more about how we got there. And I do think that I like what you said about there's a message of hope. There's a message of conflict and resolution. There's the teaching. I'd like to see that as these messages that we're putting onto this piece of paper. Because I don't see that coming through as much as I'd like it to. But maybe it is there and it's just a matter of the words on the paper don't maybe reflect exactly what was intended. If we could have watched the meeting, had I been able to sit in the meeting, I could have maybe had all these answers already. So that's why I think maybe the paper itself is getting in our own way a little bit.
Can I throw out a proposition? I like the idea of having the teachers come to a board meeting and allowing them 20 minutes to share their views and how they present the data, allowing for some Q&A, and hopefully that will close any concerns.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Well, there's a lot of different ways to get to grandma's house, and if the teachers are willing to come to a meeting.
And we just need to keep in mind with our social studies teachers, remember, we have one teacher who's just been reassigned from grade 6 to grade 8, and we have a new grade 6 teacher. But they can certainly speak to what they understand. So Jennifer Rose is our one, very senior veteran teacher, and she was one of the people who presented at the June meeting. And she probably has a good sense of the full range.
I would say our new teacher, is a high school teacher too, so an AP teacher in another district. So he can offer an interesting perspective too about where it came from, where we hear how that compares to where it came from. So
Yeah, interestingly, we also, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
This summer, we did have in my summer curriculum report from last month, there was an opportunity for a 6 through 12 social studies discussion. And this was very much a part of it, really understanding the continuum of learning that goes through the grades. So the foundation that's laid in middle school, and then the student's ability to tackle the many courses at the high school. At the high school, there was no need for them to really make an adjustment in terms of response to this legislation because we already have courses that include these topics.
In the spirit of staying close to the principles that we've sort of lived by for many years on these kinds of topics. I'd say if the administration believes that the right path is to bring in one or more teachers to describe to us the process and talk to us and do Q&A, I'm all for it. Like, then go for it. If the administration thinks there's another approach that's better, then let's do that. A little bit, this is, I mean, not a little bit, this is a replay of that curriculum committee meeting. And it's not the first time that we're doing a replay for the whole board of a curriculum committee meeting. So I hope it'll be the last time. I hope that we'll, number one, we'll just record all these meetings because they're really good meetings. They're fantastic conversations. And it's like, I always walk away going, oh, wow, I'm gonna read that book. And I'm gonna, you know, like I always learn a ton of these meetings. And I hope we're also walking away with that and going forward.
I think that's, I just want to make one comment, but I think that's a great place to conclude. I think for me, it was looking at, when I saw the Atlas information that you shared, and I went back and looked at the state standards, and then I looked at our document that we created, it seemed like we left a lot out. And maybe that was intentional because we don't want, I mean, the Atlas document was type 3 font, and it was however many pages per grade, and we've condensed it into a page and a
Yeah, so I
half.
do want to respond. to that when you're done.
I'm done.
So several years ago, I convened a joint curriculum committee of the boards to discuss communication of curriculum. What is it that parents really want to see? We knew that we were going to be phasing out Atlas, and we wanted to think forward and not just replicate what we had been doing. One of the things that was very problematic about Atlas was that visually, the format of it, parents would click on a link. The first thing they would see was a big drop down of all of the standards. So they had to wade through all the standards, which is very much in EduSpeak, to get down to sort of the meat of what the kids were going to be doing. So we surveyed parents. So we read through, as a joint curriculum committee group, we read through all those survey responses, asking parents, what is it that you most want to see? And what we learned from that was that, you know, our parents are not educators for the most part. They don't necessarily want to see an expansion of all the essential questions and enduring understandings. They don't want to read through all the standards. I think there was some trust that you guys are the educators. You're going to make sure that we're aligned with the standards. Right. Give us the topics. Tell us the units of study across a year. Give us topics. So we redesigned that public-facing curriculum document and made it more succinct, really intentionally, to look at the title of the unit, the objective of the unit, concepts, like what are the key concepts? Sometimes concepts overlap with vocabulary, and then the skills. And then with any additional resources with links. So if, as a parent, as a community member, if you want to see more about the standards or about essential questions or understandings, it's there for you, but it's not, you're not going to get distracted by it, because visually what you'll see is a much more sort of topic approach, because most parents want to say, child's in 7th grade, it's January, I just want to have some sense of what they're doing. Atlas also provided like very specific maps of, for the next 7 weeks, they will be doing X, Y, and Z. And I know in my work with our teachers across the 2 districts that sometimes the districts will place the units differently. And that's always been a little problematic when it's that specific. They feel as if it doesn't give them enough flexibility and can be misleading to parents. So parents will go, well, I'm looking at this and it says this is what they're doing. And that's, in math, as an example, we pretty much stay true to pacing. We're not going to suddenly move a topic out of sequence. But for some of the other areas, things are moving. So that was really intentional, that what you saw in the Atlas document was much more comprehensive than the new.
The only other observation, and going back to Africa, it seemed just extremely negative. And there has to be, and I'm sure that's not the whole, what we're going to teach about Africa, is there's wonderful things about Africa. People go there on vacations, and it's an amazing continent. It was lost in the summary.
In what was written.
It was.
So I think that's the thing that I've taken away in terms of there's much more to the unit than just these bullet points. And let's be sure that what's presented publicly reflects what actually taught. So to me, that's not actually a curriculum change. That's really just making sure that the documents more accurately
reflect, and that feedback is helpful.
And that was I think, the question maybe that some board members left last meeting is what really changed? Were there just these 4 paragraphs that were highlighted, or was there a more material change? Because when you follow the atlas to where we are today, it appears like it happened. It didn't.
No.
I mean, we added the state.
No, they moved some of the topics around across the 3 years. They adjusted the pacing for sure.
Yeah.
Because again, sort of gradual deepening of understanding. And there were some changes with the new frameworks as well. I mean, there used to be in this building a tremendous amount of time spent on ancient civilizations. I mean, students would reconstruct ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and that is really no longer a main focus. And sometimes, as a teacher, we have a hard time giving up the things that we really enjoy teaching. So sometimes you just have to say, you really love doing this, but let's take a look and see whether it's still part of the expectation.
So what's the
Uh,
plan?
tabled until, or do we?
We can table.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, does that work for everybody?
Well, it's the table, but are we, has the decision been made to bring teachers in and have them talk to the board and perhaps a new document?
Yeah, updated document to reflect what's actually being taught in a clearer way.
Right, so in terms of the timing of that, though, to get an updated document, I'm gonna need to schedule time with the teachers. I mean, enough time so that they can
Understood.
really have that conversation, so.
In the end, this curriculum is in full force and effect.
Yes.
Okay. So we're not holding up production lines.
As a board, if you decided to take action in a way that required me to communicate something different to the teachers, then I would certainly follow that.
I don't think we're in that direction.
And so I'm hearing 2 things. So one thing that we're going to request that the teachers come in and provide some more information about the taught units, not necessarily walking through the written document, but sharing more information about sort of as they did in June, about more of like the texture of the units, the context, what do the learning activities include? Because that was the very thoughtful conversation we had in June, because there were some questions about this is heavy stuff. How do you handle that with the students? And then the second request has been to take a look at the written document and consider revisions. So that will go through with the teachers, so that won't be turned around by next month.
No, understood.
Would it be helpful to the teachers, knowing that they may want to prepare a little bit ahead of this conversation, for us to maybe send some questions in ahead of time so that they come in having an idea of what maybe some questions that folks have, or would you prefer that it's just more?
I have a sense of your questions. If there are additional questions that you haven't voiced, then by all means.
That works. Okay.
One request.
Yeah.
Sort of at the top of the agenda, we have a long day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know, sure.
Yeah, yep, their request. Okay. Board committee reports? Hearing none, just kidding.
So, DEI task force email's gonna go out, probably not tonight, but probably tomorrow, that we have 3 brand new student reps. From Helen Keller Middle School, we have a student named Arjun, who Dr. Clapp nominated and very excited to include. And then Joe Barlow High School, we have a senior who's joining us, and then an 8th grader from John Reed Middle School, I believe. And so that will come out via email tonight, and our next meeting is December 5th at 7 p.m. at Joe Barlow High School.
Want to get eyes on Arjun? He does morning tips videos and he posts those on the website. You can watch some of those. He's quite a character.
Very, and like communicative, very.
Yeah, he's very.
Okay. Any other?
Policy, just briefly, we are we reviewed a document and index that Dr. McKinnon and team put together. This is extraordinarily helpful. It sort of brings together, so the most sort of the recently passed as well as the sort of legacy policies into one document for each of the 3 districts. Very, very helpful. We spent a couple of weeks reviewing and then making sure that it reflected sort of the truth of everything that's passed and what is current policy. And I think that the plan is to get that up on the website soon. I think in the meantime, we're sort of saying, hey, disclosure, here's all this stuff, and we're gonna make it prettier and easier to navigate in the future. So,
It can't get any prettier.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's already so beautiful. Anyway, so where we're moving to next is we're evaluating two sort of buckets. First, new regulations, law from the state, federal government, et cetera, that require new policies. So Shipman has a sort of collection of policies that they say, hey, here's new stuff you need to be paying attention to. And for the first time in, I think, known history, we're right on schedule, and we're going to be taking that, looking at it with the policy committee and prioritizing that to recommend to the boards. And then we're also looking at the policy that we held, right? The policies that we said, hold on, let's just put this over here in this bucket. And we're looking at those for prioritization, saying which one of these do we want to start with, first.
Who's on the policy?
So it is myself and Chris Parkin on the joint policy committee. Region 9 never appointed to the joint policy committee. They instead started their own policy committee who meet jointly with us. And that is Cheryl.
Follow the bouncing ball.
And that is Cheryl, and that is Sarah Leberger, and that is, and yes, and not Katie. No,
Sorry.
Kathy
night.
Thompson. Kathy Thompson. So,
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
So we were able to work together for 99% of the process, and they kind of splintered off at the end, and now we're coming back together and things are good.
Once a month, right?
Yeah, I'm switching to once a month cadence, which is like magical. It's
What do
been
you do on
3
all your free
years
time,
of
John?
weekend.
Exactly, every Friday morning.
We called it Policy Pals, and we got leather jackets made.
Yes.
We're all missing each other.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Withdrawal.
Policy pals.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Let's go. Moving right along. Any other committee reports? Okay, fantastic. Board member comments. At your own peril, you make a comment. We'll go right ahead. Jen? Good?
Nada.
Feeling great? Ready to go out in the rain? Alicia?
What's going on out there?
Yes.
Can I get a copy of this, since I gave my hard copy away? Please.
Yes, what I have to do is add,
Not right away, but
Yeah.
at some
yeah,
point soon.
what we're doing next is adding in the Region 9 slides. So it's
Okay.
one, like it includes everything. So, yes, we'll get that to you.
And will it be posted on the site? Like, will this be a part of the materials for this meeting? So that people can see it on the website?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Like,
Meaning
this
like
is a
when
great-
they eventually find our meeting and the meeting minutes, like it'll be there. Okay.
Yes, right, like that would be ideal, right?
Awesome.
Meeting agenda, meeting minutes, meeting handouts.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a member of the public asked me, how come that's not made public before the meeting? And I said, generally it isn't, but it eventually gets posted. So, right. Okay. Evan? No? Jeffrey?
I really enjoyed the conversation about social studies. And I thought it was well done. I think there are different points of view, and I think it bodes well for us going forward.
We can all do this.
Yeah.
We can bring a slightly different perspective to the table and come away a little smarter and a little better for it. So, John?
Nothing for me.
All right, fantastic.
Thanks to everyone.
Motion to adjourn?
See, like a week, right? For the
Jen,
tribal.
right, yes. Yes. fantastic.
That's not bad, really, not bad.
This is one of the first.
No, thank you. That's not mine. I do have mine.
I just couple of delusions here.
It just, I don't know, it just appeared, it's
We need it here.
It goes in the toolbox. Well, the toolbox, there's a toolbox that has all the answers. That's usually me.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, love it.
When you find my house, did you get one? I'm the same. I'm with you. My umbrella was very
We've been reading chapter a day, one book.
When they get
It's nice and shiny. In the morning, it has a lovely, it has a lovely guest back.
Different people take turns.
Yeah.
Like leading the discussion.
All right, well, that makes it easier.
Except
This
that
morning when it
this
wasn't
woman
working.
who was a
Mr.
college
White, seriously,
professor,
'cause I had to be
she
ready
was,
on
she was
30.
having
I woke up
taking
in
us
5:30.
through. And she
And there
was
was hot
just,
Right.
it was all
That's fine.
remembering, like that was her whole shtick. There was
Left them
no
outside.
like deeper
Went to
evaluation.
Oh.
And I'm just like,
Okay, yeah.
I'm just like saying to Katie, like,
Gotcha.
blooms, can we take a little bit of
Yeah,
a
we
page
have
out of
that
blooms?
later.
Yeah.
They-
I have a little more in the